Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I realized something was wrong the moment I saw that tall figure behind me on the sidewalk. The street was empty and the street lights were dim, so I could barely make out any details. But the figure was there, standing near a lamppost in the distance. I felt my stomach tighten and my throat went dry. I tried to ignore it at first because it was late and I was tired. I had worked a long shift and just wanted to get home. Still, my body felt tense and I kept looking back every few seconds. I thought maybe it was a trick of the light, but each time I glanced over my shoulder, the figure was still there. It was tall and thin, and it never moved any closer. It just stood there. I walked faster. My legs felt heavy and my breathing was uneven. My hand fumbled for my phone in my jacket pocket. I thought about calling someone, but I wasn't sure who would believe me if I said a tall stranger was following me without moving. I just wanted to get home. I turned a corner on my usual route, hoping the figure would stay behind. I looked back one more time and it was gone. That made me pause. My instincts told me to keep moving, though. I walked until I reached my apartment building. As I approached the main door, the lobby light flickered. My key shook in my hand. I finally managed to open the door, got inside, and locked it behind me. The building was quiet. I live on the 3rd floor, and the stairs creaked under my feet. The hallway smelled like stale coffee and old paint. By the time I got into my apartment, my heart was still pounding. I locked the door, slid the deadbolt, and stood there in the dark living room. My breath was fast and shallow. The place was small, but it felt safer than the street. I switched on the lamp near the couch and tried to calm down. I stared at the door for a while. Then I pulled the curtains closed on my single window. I didn't see anything outside, but I felt uneasy. I sat on the couch without taking off my jacket. My mind raced with questions. I kept replaying the walk home in my head, especially that moment I looked back and saw no one. It was unsettling because the figure had been there for a good 5 or 10 minutes. I had no explanation for how it disappeared so quickly. I rubbed my hands over my face, told myself I was just tired, and eventually got up to shower. The hot water helped me relax, and I tried to brush off the feeling of being followed. By the time I went to bed, I had almost convinced myself it was my imagination. The next day, I went to work as usual. My routine was the same, except I couldn't stop thinking about the night before. I caught myself looking over my shoulder on my breaks even when I was indoors. My coworker asked if I was okay, and I just said I was tired. I didn't want to explain anything. People at work don't usually take me seriously when I talk about weird stuff like that. Most of them just say I should get more sleep. Night came. I left work around the same time as before. I considered taking a cab, but my apartment was only a few blocks away and I didn't want to spend the money. The streets were quiet again, and the air felt cold on my skin. My hands were stuffed into my coat pockets and I kept my head down. About halfway home, I felt that same tension in my gut. I didn't want to look up, but I did. My eyes flicked around the street, scanning each sidewalk corner and each parked car. It took a few seconds, but then I saw it. The same tall figure standing near a building across the street. I couldn't see a face. It wore dark clothing. I couldn't even hear footsteps or breathing. It was absolutely still. I stopped walking and stared at it. My heart thumped so hard I felt it in my neck. My fists clenched inside my pockets. I was tired of feeling scared, so I stepped off the sidewalk and tried to cross the street. Before I could get halfway, the figure vanished. It didn't run. It didn't step behind a wall. It was just there 1 second and gone the next. I stood there under a streetlight, feeling the wind cutting through my coat. The sidewalk was empty. I looked around for a door or an alley it could have slipped into, but there was nothing open. The buildings were locked up for the night. I hurried home, got in, and locked the door again. My hands were shaking. I didn't feel safe in my own apartment, but I had nowhere else to go. I turned on every light in the living room and the kitchen. It was past midnight when I finally sat on my bed, fully dressed. I tried to watch some random show on TV to distract myself, but I kept glancing at the window. The curtains were closed, but I was afraid to peek. After a while, I dozed off. When I woke up, the TV was still on, and the sun was coming through the curtains. I felt a surge of relief. I told myself that maybe if I got some decent sleep, I would forget about all of this. That day at work was rough. I couldn't concentrate. I kept imagining that figure in every corner of my mind. I went through my shifts in a daze, messing up simple tasks and dropping items. My boss noticed but didn't say much. He just gave me a look that said he was concerned, but I avoided eye contact. When the day ended, I decided to take a different route home. It was a few blocks longer and involved a bus ride, but I wanted to see if that would help. It didn't. The entire bus ride, I felt that itching sensation on the back of my neck like someone was watching me. I avoided looking out the bus window, but whenever I glanced, I thought I caught a glimpse of something tall passing by the stoplights or standing near a trash bin. My eyes might have been playing tricks on me, but my heart wouldn't settle. When I got off the bus near my apartment, I could feel my chest tightening again. I jogged the rest of the way home. When I reached my front door, I heard a faint shuffle behind me. I spun around, but I only saw a few cars parked along the sidewalk. The sound had already stopped. I got inside and locked everything. The apartment felt colder than usual. I checked the thermostat and it read the same as always. I left most of the lights on and tried to eat something simple for dinner. My appetite was shot. My stomach felt tense, and I could barely force down a few bites of a sandwich. I put the rest in the fridge and walked over to the window. I pulled the curtain aside just a bit and looked out. That's when I saw the figure again. It was standing at the corner across the street, right under a flickering street lamp. My heart pounded. My palms broke into a sweat. The figure's head seemed to tilt upward, as if it was looking straight at me, but I couldn't see eyes or a face. It was just tall, dark, and still. I let the curtain fall back. My legs felt weak. I paced around my apartment for a few minutes trying to decide what to do. I grabbed my phone, thought about calling the police. Then I realized I had no proof and no description other than someone tall, wearing dark clothes, disappearing when I approach. It sounded ridiculous, but I couldn't stand there doing nothing. I tried to calm down by focusing on simple tasks. I went to the kitchen and washed a few dishes. My hands were shaking, so I almost dropped a plate. I then went to the bathroom to brush my teeth. After that, I braced myself and went to the window again. I pulled the curtain open a little. The corner was empty. I stayed there for a minute, just staring at the street, hoping I'd see something normal like a neighbor walking by. Nothing. I closed the curtain and went to bed. The next night, I tried to stay out longer with a coworker, thinking maybe some socializing would take my mind off everything. We grabbed a quick bite to eat, talked about boring stuff, and eventually I headed home around 10. I felt on edge the moment I got out of the taxi. The sky was cloudy, and the streetlights flickered on and off. My building looked even darker than usual. I stepped onto the sidewalk, holding my breath, scanning my surroundings. I didn't see anything at first. My muscles were still tense. Then I heard a soft tapping sound behind me. I spun around. Nothing was there. I walked faster toward my building door. My key didn't want to fit in the lock. My hands trembled. I managed to open it after a few tries and hurried inside. I didn't see or hear anyone in the lobby. The old elevator was out of order, so I had to use the stairs. Every step echoed. My heart was racing and my mouth felt dry. When I reached the third floor, I heard a slight creak behind me. I jerked around, but I only saw the empty hallway. The light above me buzzed faintly. I made it to my apartment, unlocked the door, and slammed it shut. I leaned my back against it, catching my breath. I forced myself to check every room. The living room was clear. The kitchen was empty. The bathroom was fine, and my bedroom was normal. Nothing inside seemed out of place. I felt a small bit of relief, at least until I walked by the window again. I didn't see anything outside at first, so I decided to open the curtain a bit wider. That's when I realized the figure was pressed against the wall near the front of my building. I couldn't see it clearly because of the angle, but I saw something tall and dark standing very close to the wall. I gasped and stumbled backward. My heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped the phone. I told them there was someone suspicious lurking by my building. They said they'd send a car to check. I waited by the window, but I stayed out of sight. After about 10 minutes, I saw a patrol car pull up. An officer got out, shone a flashlight around, and walked along the sidewalk. I saw him looking around the corner, near where I had seen the figure, but it was gone again. The officer knocked on the main door and I went down to meet him in the lobby. He asked me a few questions. I told him what I could, but I left out the vanishing parts because I thought he would write me off as crazy. He said there was no one there now, but he'd keep an eye on the area. I thanked him, and he left. Back in my apartment, I felt restless. I paced around the living room until I was too tired to stand. Eventually, I sat on my couch, lights still on. My eyelids grew heavy. I drifted off for a while. A banging noise woke me. I jumped up, pulse pounding. I looked around. My front door was locked. The chain was still in place. The time on my phone showed it was nearly 3 in the morning. The banging noise didn't repeat. I wondered if it was just a dream. I rubbed my eyes and walked to the window again. Outside, everything was dark. The street lamp at the corner was flickering. I tried to see if the figure was there, but I couldn't spot anything. After a few minutes, I closed the curtain and went to bed. My head was spinning and I just wanted some rest. Over the next few days, I kept spotting that figure in different places around my building. Once, I glanced out the peephole in my door and saw a faint shape at the end of the hallway. It made no sound, and when I opened the door to check, the hallway was empty. Another time, I thought I saw it standing under the stairwell. Again, it vanished the second I approached. Each encounter left me sweating and breathing hard. My stomach churned with nerves. My routine turned into a cycle of dread. I'd go to work, try to act normal, come home, and feel my chest tighten as soon as night fell. I considered sleeping somewhere else. I even checked a few motel prices on my phone, but I didn't want to spend the money and I didn't have friends nearby who would welcome me on their couch. So I stayed. I started leaving every light on at night. I made a habit of checking the windows and door multiple times. I placed a chair against the door even though I knew it wouldn't do much good if this figure could disappear at will. I just felt a bit safer with some barrier in place. One night, around midnight, I was sitting on the couch, staring at the TV without really paying attention to it. My eyes were dry and itchy from lack of sleep. My chest felt tight. Then I heard the creak of a floorboard. It came from the hallway outside my door. I muted the TV and listened. Another creak. My heart hammered. I stood up slowly. I walked to the door on tiptoe, trying not to make noise. I leaned forward and looked through the peephole. All I saw was a dim hallway. I waited. My breath sounded too loud in my ears. Then I noticed a tall shape at the far end near the staircase. It was barely visible in the weak light, but it was there. My stomach flipped. My hands started to sweat. I watched it for a few seconds, willing it to move or make some noise, but it just stood there. I backed away from the peephole, not sure what to do. My heart pounded so hard my chest hurt. I grabbed my phone again, considered calling the police, but they hadn't been helpful before. By the time they arrived, the figure would be gone. I pressed my ear to the door. Silence. I took a deep breath, unchained the door, and turned the knob. My hands trembled so much it was hard to do even that. I opened the door a crack. The hallway light flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw a dark shape near the stairs again. Then it was gone. I stood there for a while, my heart thudding in my ears. The hallway felt too quiet. The air felt heavy. I closed the door, locked it again, and just stood there, leaning against it. That was last night. Right now, I'm sitting in my apartment typing this out on my phone because I can't sleep. My eyes keep darting to the window, waiting for that tall figure to appear. I keep hearing every tiny noise in this old building, every pop in the pipes, every scratch in the walls. My heartbeat won't slow down. I'm afraid to turn off the lights. I'm afraid to lie down and close my eyes. I don't know who or what is following me. I only know I feel trapped in my own home. I can't prove anything to anyone, and the police can't do much if there's no actual crime. But it's real to me, and it's getting closer each night. I don't have a plan. I just keep going through the motions, hoping this figure will go away on its own. My gut tells me it won't. Every time I walk outside, I feel eyes on me. Every time I come back, I half expect to find the door open or something missing. Nothing has changed inside, but my nerves are raw. My head hurts from lack of sleep. I can't focus on my job. I can't relax. Every time I look out my window or step into the hallway, I expect to see that tall shape standing there, silent and still. I wish I had a better ending to this story. I wish I could say it went away and never came back. But I can't. Right now, I'm just stuck in this cycle. I lock my doors, check the windows, and try to stay alert. Each night, I see or hear something that makes my heart race. Each day, I pretend everything is normal. I'm sharing this because I can't keep it all bottled up anymore. That's all I have. That's where I am, sitting in my living room with the lights on, listening for sounds in the hallway, and waiting for the next time I see that tall figure standing outside my window or down the street. I'm not sure what else to do except endure it for now. I moved into this house in the countryside last month. On the very first night, I heard something strange. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep. The rooms were mostly empty because I hadn't finished unpacking. The floorboards creaked whenever I shifted my weight. The smell of dust hung in the air. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a soft thump in the hallway outside my bedroom. I sat up in bed and listened. I thought maybe I had imagined it, but then I heard it again, only louder. It sounded like a door clicking open. There was no wind that night and all the windows were shut. I tried to ignore it, but my heart was pounding. I decided to get up and check the hallway. When I stepped outside my bedroom, I noticed a faint light coming from the attic door at the end of the hall. The door was open. I knew I had closed it earlier in the day. I walked toward it, feeling the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My footsteps felt too loud on the wooden floor. When I reached the attic door, I saw that the chain I had used to secure it was dangling loose. I could have sworn I locked it before going to bed. The attic itself was lit by a single overhead bulb. The switch was right next to the attic entrance. I flicked it off, closed the door, and slid the chain back in place. I even tested the lock once more. It seemed fine. I stood there for a few seconds, listening for any movement. Nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing. I decided to go back to bed. I told myself it must have been a loose latch or something like that. The next morning, I tried not to think about it. I had a lot to do. Unpack boxes, set up my living room furniture, and figure out where to store all my stuff. The house had a musty odor, and I opened a few windows to air it out. I also decided to check the attic during daylight. I climbed up with a flashlight, even though the overhead bulb was working. The attic was full of cobwebs, old junk, and rotting cardboard boxes. I saw a few chairs in the corner, some broken lamps, and a trunk that I couldn't open. Nothing looked valuable or worth keeping. I didn't see any sign of forced entry. No animals, no footprints or anything else. The attic seemed empty, aside from the junk. The door latch looked okay from the inside, too. There was no reason for it to swing open on its own, at least nothing obvious. That night I locked the attic door again before going to bed. I used the chain, tested the knob, and made sure the lock clicked. I even gave the door a little tug to confirm it was secure. Around midnight I heard the noise again. It was so soft at first that I almost slept through it. But then it got louder, like something was pushing against the door from the other side. I forced myself to get up, heart racing, and walked to the hallway. The attic door was wide open again. The light was on in the attic. The chain was swinging back and forth, almost like someone had just unlocked it. I stood there trying to make sense of it. My mouth went dry. I didn't want to go up there, but I also couldn't ignore it. I took a deep breath, hit the switch at the doorway, and walked up the steps. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Halfway up, the light flickered, and then it went off. I stopped. The darkness felt heavy, and I froze in place. I listened for anything. Breathing, footsteps, scratching. Nothing. The silence was so thick that I could hear my own pulse. My legs started shaking, but I forced myself to continue up the remaining steps. When I reached the top, I clicked the switch on my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating dusty boxes and rickety furniture. I swept the flashlight around. Everything looked the same as it did earlier that day. No signs of anyone hiding up there. I checked behind the trunk, under the old chairs. No one. Still, I felt watched. The hair on my arms stood up. I felt a chill in the air, even though it was warm outside. After a few minutes, I flicked the overhead light switch again, and this time it worked. I saw no one. I went back downstairs, locked the door, and tried to sleep. I barely caught a few hours. Over the next few days, I kept trying to ignore the attic situation. I told myself it was an old house with old wiring. Doors can warp, locks can be faulty. Maybe there was a draft I hadn't noticed. I had more important things to worry about, like my new job starting the next week. I focused on unpacking my clothes, organizing the kitchen, and setting up my workspace. But every single night, without fail, the attic door ended up open. I would hear it at random hours, sometimes at midnight, sometimes closer to 3 in the morning. I tried changing the lock, installing new hardware. I even bought a more secure chain with a thicker hook. I tested it during the day, yanking on the door with all my strength, and it stayed shut. But somehow, once the sun went down, I'd eventually find it open again. The overhead light would be on, flicker or turn off just when I got near. It made no sense. One night I decided I would just ignore it. I heard the door creak open around 1 a.m. I stayed in bed trying to force myself to sleep. But about 10 minutes later, I heard something else. Low murmuring, like a whisper in a far-off room. At first I thought it was the wind, but it had a pattern, like someone speaking in hushed tones. I couldn't make out any words, but it made my stomach twist. My mouth went dry and my arms started tingling. I listened, heart pounding, for several minutes. The sound didn't stop. I put my pillow over my head, but I could still hear it faintly. It was coming from the attic. I mustered the courage to get up, determined to confront whatever was causing that noise. I grabbed a flashlight and went into the hallway. Sure enough, the attic door was open. The chain dangled there, swaying slightly. I stood at the foot of the attic stairs, shining my flashlight up. I could still hear the murmuring. Then, right when I placed my foot on the first step, the overhead light in the attic shut off. The whispers stopped. Everything fell silent again. My chest felt tight, and I had a knot in my throat. I thought about turning around and running back to my room. I wanted to pretend this wasn't happening. But a part of me needed to see for myself that there was no one up there. I forced myself to climb the steps. With every step, the stairs made a dull creak. At the top, I panned the flashlight around. Nobody. Just the dusty boxes in the trunk. The chain overhead bulb was swinging slightly, as if someone had just yanked it. I reached up and pulled it, and the light came back on. Everything looked the same except one of my own boxes was in the corner. That box had been in the living room earlier that evening. I froze. I recognized that box because it was labeled with my name in black marker. I remembered placing it near my TV stand downstairs. I had never carried it up to the attic. I stepped closer and saw that it was open. My clothes and books were dumped inside, but they seemed out of order. My shirts were unfolded, my books were scattered. My stomach churned. I picked up a t-shirt and noticed it smelled faintly of dampness, like it had been left in a corner for a while. I felt queasy, trying to figure out how it got there. I left the attic in a hurry, locked the door, and spent the rest of the night staring at my bedroom ceiling. My thoughts spun in circles, trying to find a logical reason for all this. I came up empty. The following day, I checked every inch of the house. I looked for secret passages or hidden doors. I tapped on the walls, checked the basement, and even opened the trunk in the attic with a crowbar. The trunk was empty except for a few moth-eaten blankets. I found nothing else suspicious. I also set up a small camera in the hallway pointing at the attic door. I wanted to catch whatever was opening it on video. That night, I waited in bed, wide awake, until I heard the usual soft click of the attic door opening. My nerves were shot, but I forced myself to stay put. In the morning, I checked the camera footage. The door began rattling around 1:15 a.m. Then it clicked open, slowly. The overhead attic light turned on by itself, flooding the hallway with a weak glow. But the camera didn't catch any visible figure. No one stepped into view. The door just swung open. A minute later, the light flickered out. That was it. No sign of a person or anything else. I felt a pit in my stomach as I replayed the footage. Something was causing that door to open, but there was no one there. I tried to pretend it might be an electrical glitch combined with a faulty latch, but I knew how tight that latch was because I had tested it dozens of times. That day I noticed more of my personal items missing. A few shirts, a photo album, and my toolbox. I checked the attic, and sure enough, they were there. The photo album was splayed open on the trunk, and my toolbox was on top of a stack of old newspapers. My shirts were draped over the back of a chair. My skin prickled at the thought of someone, moving my belongings at night. I tried to keep calm and told myself I would figure it out logically, but I felt this constant tension in my chest, like I was bracing for another shock. I contacted a local locksmith and told him I needed the best possible locks for my doors. When he arrived, I didn't mention the attic issue in detail, just said I had concerns about security. He installed a heavy deadbolt on the attic door, along with a reinforced strike plate. He told me if anyone tried to open that door without a key from the outside, they'd have to break the entire frame. I paid him, thanked him, and tried to feel optimistic. The door was now as secure as I could make it. That night, I double-checked the bolt, gave it a few tugs, tested the key. Everything felt solid. Then I tried to relax in front of the TV. I was restless, pacing around the living room. Eventually, I dozed off in the armchair. I woke up to complete darkness, except for the faint glow of the standby light on the TV. The house was silent. I sat there for a moment, disoriented, trying to remember where I was. Then I heard it. The click of the attic door unlatching. A wave of nausea hit me. I got up, fumbling for the switch on a nearby lamp, but the bulb didn't turn on. The power was still working because the TV's standby light was on, but the lamp was dead. My heart pounded as I stepped into the hallway. The attic door stood open, despite the new deadbolt. I felt the blood drain from my face. The overhead attic light was off, but I heard the same faint murmuring. My skin crawled. I was shaking so hard I almost dropped my flashlight. I walked to the bottom of the attic steps. The murmuring continued, soft and steady. I flipped the attic light switch. Nothing happened. I braced myself and climbed the steps. Every step felt like it took an eternity. My hands were slick with sweat. At the top, I moved the flashlight beam around the attic. I saw my suitcase and a small collection of other items from downstairs piled near the far corner. The murmuring stopped as soon as my light hit that pile. Then the overhead bulb flickered on by itself, bathing the attic in a weak yellowish light. My heart hammered in my chest. I looked around for any sign of movement. There was nothing there but dusty boxes and my misplaced things. I slowly approached the pile. My suitcase was partially open. It had some of my shirts and pants thrown in the way you'd pack if you were in a hurry. My phone charger was there too, even though I had left it in the kitchen. I backed away, feeling like I might pass out. I couldn't stay in that attic any longer. I rushed back down the stairs, pulled the door shut, and locked it again with the new bolt. Then I slid a heavy cabinet in front of the door. I didn't care about damaging the floor. I just wanted a barrier between me and that attic. After that, I went to my bedroom and shoved a chair under the doorknob. I sat on the bed, trying to breathe normally, but my mind was racing. I felt trapped in my own house, not sure what to do next. Over the next few nights, the same pattern continued. The cabinet I placed in front of the attic door would be moved aside by morning. Each time I found something new in the attic. My book bag, my shoes, a couple of plates from the kitchen. I started losing sleep. Every creak or groan made me jump. My muscles stayed tense all day, and I had trouble focusing at work. Each evening, I dreaded nightfall. I would lock the attic door, push the cabinet in front of it, and try to sleep. But I always woke up with a knot in my stomach, knowing something had happened again. Yesterday, I decided I couldn't keep living like this. I packed some clothes in a duffel bag and planned to stay with a coworker for a while. But when I walked into the hallway to leave, I found the attic door open, even though it was still daytime. The overhead light was off, but I heard a faint rustling noise up there. I stood frozen for a moment, gripping my duffel bag. A part of me wanted to drop everything and run. Another part of me felt like I had to see what was happening before I abandoned the house. I climbed the attic stairs one final time. My mouth was dry, and my heart thumped so hard I thought it might burst. The attic looked the same as ever, dusty, cluttered, poorly lit. My clothes and personal belongings were all gathered in the center of the room, almost like someone was trying to pack them. Then the overhead light flickered, and I heard a soft scraping noise behind me, near the attic entrance. I spun around, shining my flashlight. Nothing there. I heard a low murmur. My body went cold, and a chill ran down my spine. I wanted to shout or scream, but my throat felt tight. I backed away, keeping the flashlight aimed at the door. My hands were trembling. The murmuring quieted, leaving only my ragged breathing. That was it. I turned and bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping on the last step. I didn't bother locking the attic door. I grabbed my car keys, threw my duffel bag into the passenger seat, and drove away. Right now, I'm sitting in a small motel a few miles away, trying to decide my next move. My body feels stiff, and my head is pounding. I keep replaying the sounds and the open door in my mind. I don't have a neat explanation for any of this. I just know that the attic door won't stay closed. I know that every time I went up there, I felt watched. My belongings kept disappearing and reappearing in that dark, cramped space, and I heard those low whispers, always stopping when I got too close. I'm writing this down because I need a record. I'm not sure if I'll go back to that house. Part of me wants to tear out the attic door and toss it in a fire, but I don't think that would change anything. I can't think about it too hard because it makes me feel like I'm going crazy. All I know is that the attic door refuses to stay locked. Something up there doesn't want me to have peace. And even though I'm not inside that house right now, I can still feel the tension in my chest. I keep expecting to hear that faint creak of the attic door opening on its own, even here in this motel room. It's like a sound I can't forget. I'm not sure I ever will. I still remember the day I walked into that antique store. The place smelled like old wood and dust. Everything felt cramped. The owner stood behind a counter, flipping through a newspaper. He gave me a quick glance and went back to reading. I moved around the store, looking at clocks, lamps, and some odd sculptures. Then I saw the mirror. It was propped against a corner near the back, almost hidden by a tall coat rack. Its wooden frame was a dark color, chipped in a few places. There was a faint pattern carved around the edges, but most of the detail seemed worn away by time. Something about that mirror drew me in, so I asked the price. The owner paused, then sold it to me for less than I expected. I thought I was getting a good deal. I didn't ask too many questions, I just loaded it into my car and drove home. That was the moment everything started to shift in my life. I live alone in a small one-bedroom apartment. My place is on the third floor of a building that's been around for decades, so it fits my taste for older things. My furniture is kind of a mix. There's a modern couch in the living room, but the coffee table is an antique I picked up a few years ago. I've got a cheap dresser in the bedroom, but the lamp on it is something I got from my grandmother. I don't stick to one style. I just buy what catches my eye. That mirror felt like it would fit in with the rest of my stuff. I carried it up the stairs, feeling a little strain in my arms because the frame was heavier than I expected. I set it against the wall in my bedroom, leaned it at an angle so I could see my reflection whenever I got dressed. It was big enough to show my whole body, I wiped the glass with some paper towels to get rid of the dust. There was a tiny crack on the bottom right corner, but it didn't bother me. The first night with the mirror in my room seemed normal at first. I brushed my teeth, changed into pajamas, and switched off the main light, leaving just a small bedside lamp on. I checked myself in the mirror for a second, mostly out of habit. My reflection looked a bit shadowy, but that's what happens in dim light. I got into bed and turned off the lamp. The room became dark except for a little glow from the streetlight outside my window. I fell asleep quickly, not thinking about the mirror at all. In the middle of the night, I woke up for no clear reason. My heart was racing a bit and I felt a strange chill. The room was silent except for the hum of my old air conditioner. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. It was a little after 3 a.m. I turned my head toward the mirror. It was too dark to see my reflection, but the shape of it was there. My eyes were still adjusting, and I felt a slight twinge of discomfort. It was like I expected to see something there, but I told myself I was being jumpy. I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. My mind started playing tricks on me, so I got up, walked to the mirror, and turned on the light. I saw myself standing there with messy hair and tired eyes. Nothing else. I switched the light off and got back in bed. That was the end of it for that night. The next morning, I forgot about that weird moment. I showered, got dressed, and left for work. When I came home that evening, I glanced at the mirror while I changed clothes. I noticed something off in the reflection, like a slight delay when I lifted my arm. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting or some trick of the angle. I raised my right hand to scratch my head. In the mirror, it looked like it took a fraction of a second for my reflection to catch up. I frowned and tested it again. I moved my left hand in circles. The reflection felt a bit slow. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to make me pause. I chalked it up to being tired from work. That night after dinner, I sat on my couch watching TV. My bedroom door was open, and from my angle, I could see part of the mirror. The lights were on in the living room, so the bedroom was darker, but I still caught a glimpse of my bed and a portion of the mirror's frame. While flipping channels, I saw a movement in the corner of my eye. I looked toward the bedroom. It seemed like a shadow passed across the mirror, like someone had walked behind me. But I was alone. I got up and went into the bedroom. The mirror showed just me and the rest of the room behind me. No shadows, no strange movements. I shook my head and tried to laugh it off. I told myself that I was just seeing things. My heart rate was a bit fast, but I tried to calm down by watching more TV and ignoring the mirror for the rest of the night. Over the next few days, small things kept bothering me. I'd catch the reflection of the door behind me, but it looked slightly different in the mirror than in reality. At certain times, the door in the mirror seemed open wider than it was in real life. Once, I closed the door all the way, but in the reflection it looked half open. When I turned around to check, the door was fully closed. The moment I glanced back at the mirror, it looked fully closed in the reflection too. It was like it was messing with me. I'd walk back and forth trying to replicate the effect, but I never caught it when I was paying full attention. It always seemed to happen in my peripheral vision, or when I was halfway across the room. One evening, I sat on my bed scrolling through my phone. It was around 9 p.m. I felt restless and distracted. The mirror was right there, angled in my direction. I glanced at it. For a split second, I saw a shape standing in the reflection near the foot of my bed. It looked like a person, but I couldn't see details. It was more like a dark outline. I spun around and found nothing there. My heart pounded. I stood up, walked around the bed, and checked the entire room. I looked under the bed, in the closet, behind the curtains. Everything was empty. My head felt light, and I caught myself breathing faster than normal. I wanted to believe it was my mind playing tricks. Maybe a car passed outside, and the headlights created some weird shadow. I told myself it was that. I didn't really believe it, but I tried. I considered moving the mirror out of my bedroom, but it felt silly. Part of me liked how it looked. The old frame had character. Also, I was a bit stubborn. I didn't want to admit that this old thing was creeping me out, so I left it where it was. A week went by with more little incidents. The reflection would sometimes show me a fraction of a second behind, or I'd see movement that wasn't happening in real life. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I tried to talk myself into calling the antique store to ask about its history, but I felt stupid saying something like, "Hey, I think your mirror is haunted or broken in a weird way." Instead, I decided to film it. I got a small stand for my phone and placed it facing the mirror while I stood in front. I moved my arms around, stepped side to side, tried to do it slowly, then quickly. I wanted to catch the reflection lagging. In person, I noticed the delay a few times, but when I replayed the video, everything looked normal. It was frustrating. On camera, the mirror acted like any ordinary mirror. I recorded a few more times over the next days, but it never showed anything odd. Whenever I tried to prove it, the mirror seemed fine. My sleep started to suffer. I'd wake up in the middle of the night for no reason. I would look at the mirror and feel uneasy. Sometimes I thought I saw a faint silhouette in the reflection, but it vanished so quickly I couldn't be sure. My body tensed up every time I walked past the mirror in the dark. Even brushing my teeth felt different because the bathroom door had a direct line of sight to my bedroom mirror. I'd catch glimpses of it in the corner of my vision, and I'd tense, expecting to see something. My shoulders felt tight, and I started getting headaches from the stress. One night, I decided to cover the mirror with a sheet. It was around 10 p.m. I pulled an old white sheet from my closet and draped it over the frame. It covered the entire surface. I felt a wave of relief. It was like I could finally breathe. I stayed up for a couple of hours watching TV in the living room. When I went back to the bedroom, I froze in the doorway. The sheet was on the floor. It was crumpled at the base of the mirror. The mirror itself was uncovered, reflecting me standing there. My throat felt dry. I knew I'd covered it properly, and I hadn't heard anything. My apartment has wooden floors that squeak if I walk around, so I doubt I would have missed someone sneaking in. I wasn't sure what to do. I almost left the apartment right then, but it was late, and I had nowhere else to go. I forced myself to pick up the sheet and cover the mirror again, this time using tape to secure it at the top. Then I went to bed, hoping I'd see it still covered in the morning. When I woke up, the sheet was gone again, but this time, it was folded in a neat square on my dresser. I stood there, blinking, feeling a cold sweat on my forehead. The tape was still stuck to the sheet, but someone had cleanly peeled it off the wood frame. I felt sick. I didn't want to stay in that room anymore. I got dressed quickly, threw on some shoes, and left the apartment. I spent most of that day walking around downtown. I tried to distract myself in stores and coffee shops, but all I could think about was that mirror. I considered throwing it out, but it was heavy, and I felt uneasy about just leaving it in a dumpster. I went back late in the afternoon. The place felt stale, like no one had opened a window in weeks. I stepped into my bedroom. The mirror looked the same, but I felt watched. It wasn't a logical feeling, but I couldn't shake it. I pulled out my phone and dialed the antique shop. The owner answered. I said I had a question about a mirror I bought recently. He asked me to describe it. I explained the wood frame, the carvings, the small crack in the bottom corner. He hesitated, then said something about how it came from an estate sale, but he didn't know more than that. I didn't mention the strange things. Instead, I asked if he'd be willing to take it back. He said he doesn't usually do returns, but if I came by with it, he'd look it over and maybe buy it back for a lower price. I was ready to say yes. Then a sound on my end made me jump. I heard a soft scraping noise behind me. I turned and saw the mirror shift slightly. It looked like it rocked on its base just a tiny bit. I didn't see any reason for it to move. My window was closed and there was no draft. I swallowed and told the owner I'd call him back. I walked over to the mirror and nudged the frame. It felt solid. Then I crouched down and looked under the base. Everything seemed normal. As I stood up, I realized my reflection was staring at me in a way that felt off. Usually when you move, your reflection moves too. But for half a second, my reflection's head seemed to linger before matching my motion. I stumbled backward, feeling my heart hammering. I left the bedroom and shut the door. That night I tried to sleep on my couch. I kept the bedroom door closed, but I couldn't relax. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the door slowly opening. I pictured myself walking into the bedroom and seeing that mirror sitting there waiting. My arms felt cold and I kept rubbing them to calm myself down. I watched random shows until I drifted off around midnight. I woke up again at 3 a.m. This time, the bedroom door was wide open. I know I closed it because I remember turning the doorknob. My stomach lurched. I stared at the dark hallway leading to my bedroom. The air in the living room felt still and stale. My lungs felt tight. I felt an urge to check the mirror, but I was also afraid of what I might see. My scalp tingled. My eyes stung from lack of sleep. I got up, grabbed the heaviest flashlight I owned from a kitchen drawer, and walked slowly to the bedroom. I didn't hear anything. When I flipped on the light, the mirror looked the same as always, but I felt pressure in the air. I walked up to it, raised the flashlight, and tapped the glass. The reflection stayed normal. I dropped the flashlight to my side and rubbed my eyes. Then something caught my attention. The reflection showed the hallway behind me. I saw a figure move past the doorway. I spun around, shining the flashlight, but the hallway was empty. My heart pounded. I could feel sweat on my back and neck. I turned back to the mirror. There was nothing in it now but me and the room behind me. I backed away, trembling. I decided to get rid of the mirror the next morning, no matter what. I didn't care if I had to pay someone to haul it away. I left the bedroom, pulled the door shut, and stuffed a chair against the doorknob. I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing faint noises like light taps or the rustle of something shifting across the floor. I told myself it was just the old building settling, maybe someone in the apartment above me walking around. But deep down, I knew it was the mirror. When daylight came, I felt a bit braver. I ate a quick breakfast, grabbed my toolbox, and went to remove the mirror. I thought I could slide it into my car and drive it back to the antique store. But when I stepped into the bedroom, the mirror was gone from its usual spot. It was leaning against the opposite wall. I had left it leaning near the window. Now it was near the closet. My ears rang. I swallowed hard and walked over. The floor around it was scuffed, like something heavy had been dragged across the wood. That was enough. I lifted the mirror, ignoring the strain in my arms, and carried it out into the hallway. It was hard work, but adrenaline helped. I didn't bother wrapping it or protecting it. I just wanted it gone. I took it down the stairs, almost tripping once. I stuffed it into the back seat of my car, leaving the door partially open because it barely fit. I drove straight to the antique store. The owner looked surprised to see me hauling it in. He started to say something about offering me half of what I paid, but I cut him off. I told him he could keep it for free. He hesitated, looked at me like I was crazy, then nodded. I left it there, got back in my car, and drove home without saying another word. Once I got back to my apartment, I walked into the bedroom. The space where the mirror had been felt different, like the air was lighter. I checked every corner, every closet, every inch of the place, expecting to see something. But there was nothing. I could breathe again. I haven't bought another mirror since then. I use the small one in my bathroom for shaving and brushing my teeth, and that's enough for me. Sometimes, though, especially at night, I still feel like I'm being watched. I'll check all the rooms, open the closets, look around. I won't see anything, but I can't shake the memory of that reflection not matching my movements, of that dark shape crossing behind me. I feel a small rush of relief every time I remember I gave the mirror away. I don't know what happened to it after that. Sometimes I wonder if the antique shop sold it again. I hope not, for whoever ends up with it next. But it's not my problem anymore. I'm just glad to have my space back. Even if some nights in the silence I still wait for the sound of that mirror scraping across the floor. I never want to see that reflection again. I first spotted the trapdoor on a Saturday afternoon. I was in the basement stripping away old panels on the far wall. The previous owners had left a mess of moldy wallpaper and warped wooden boards. While prying loose a stubborn piece of wood, my flashlight beam swept across a gap in the floor. At first I thought it was a crack. Then I saw the square outline, right against the corner. It didn't match the original floor plan I had in my head. It was too perfect, too well hidden under an extra layer of shabby linoleum. I knelt down and scratched at the edges with the tip of my screwdriver. My stomach felt tight. I'd watched enough shows about hidden spaces to know this might lead to something strange. I pulled a pocket knife from my tool belt, wedged it under the worn-out material, and slowly peeled back the top layer. The square frame of the trapdoor became clear. It was made of old wood, a little warped but still intact. There was a simple iron ring embedded in the center. I stared at it, hesitating. My heart thumped in my chest, and I noticed my breathing got shallow. The basement air smelled like dust and damp concrete, and I could hear the faint hum of the furnace. I grabbed the iron ring and lifted. The wood creaked. It felt heavier than I expected, like something was weighing it down from the other side. After a few pulls, it popped open. A rush of stale air poured out. It smelled like earth and old stone. At first I could only see darkness. Then I pointed my flashlight into the opening. A small set of wooden steps descended maybe 5 feet. The walls there were rough concrete. I looked around the rest of the basement, feeling a spike of adrenaline. Everything else was normal. Exposed brick, scattered tools, leftover paint cans. Nothing suggested a hidden space. But here it was. A dark hole I hadn't known was part of the house. I climbed down. The steps wobbled under my weight, but they held. The space opened into a low passage. I had to hunch over so I wouldn't hit my head on the overhead beams. The flashlight showed a narrow corridor stretching forward about 10 yards, maybe less. My pulse was pounding in my ears and my palms felt slick with sweat. As I inched down the corridor, the air got colder. I couldn't see any sign of water damage, which was surprising for a hidden spot like that. The walls were just concrete with a few cracks. I heard my own breathing echo softly. Then I reached the end of the passage. It led to a small room, empty except for a single light bulb fixture dangling from the ceiling. No bulb screwed in. No furniture. No debris. No clues about who built this place or why. I moved my flashlight across the walls. Nothing but concrete. I knelt down and ran my hand along the floor. Solid. No trapdoor in here. The air was stale, and I felt a chill down my arms. I stood there for a minute, shining the light around, waiting for something to happen. Nothing. It was just an empty chamber, but the silence pressed on my ears. I turned around and made my way back up. I felt like something was behind me, even though I heard no movement. I stepped quickly and climbed the steps into the main basement. I shut the trap door. My heart was thudding in my chest. I stood there feeling a strange pull to open it again, but I resisted. I decided I'd block it off until I figured out what to do. I covered it with a heavy wooden crate of leftover tiles and went upstairs. That night, I sat in the living room with the TV on low. I tried to occupy myself with some random show, but my mind kept going back to that hidden corridor. I couldn't shake the image of the empty room and the silence around me down there. It felt as though I discovered something that wasn't meant to be found. My stomach was tense and I barely slept. The next morning I woke up early. I planned to leave the basement alone for the day, maybe focus on the kitchen instead. But around mid-morning I realized I'd left a few tools in the basement. I needed them for the kitchen cabinets. When I got to the basement door, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the knob. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was just an empty corridor. I pushed the door open and walked down the steps, flipping on the overhead light. Everything looked the same. Scattered boxes, chipped paint, the dusty floor. Then I heard it, a voice whispering my name. It was so soft I almost thought I imagined it. It sounded close to my right ear, like someone leaning in to murmur. I spun around, heart hammering, but saw nothing. I stood still, breathing hard, scanning the basement. It was empty. The whisper didn't come again. I grabbed my tools and hurried back upstairs. My body was shaking when I got to the kitchen. I set the tools down and tried to calm myself. It couldn't be real. The furnace or water pipes sometimes make noises. Maybe I'd heard a squeak that resembled my name. I didn't want to think about the alternative. For the rest of the day, I avoided going back down. That night, I kept remembering the voice. It had a softness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My mind replayed it over and over. I wanted to believe I'd misheard, but it felt too clear. I told myself I'd do a thorough check in the morning. I didn't want to stay in ignorance. So the next day, I went down again. I brought a better flashlight and a small handheld camcorder, thinking I'd record everything just to confirm I wasn't imagining things. The basement was quiet. I checked behind boxes, opened every closet. Nothing was out of place. I scanned every corner for hidden speakers or wires, some sort of trick or leftover alarm system. I found nothing suspicious. Then I lifted the crate off the trap door, pulled it open, and climbed down again. The corridor was just as narrow, and the stale smell of old concrete filled my nose. I filmed everything, shining the flashlight on the walls, the ceiling, the floor. When I reached the small room at the end, it looked exactly the same as before. Cold, empty, and silent. The camera picked up my footsteps and my breathing, but no other sounds. After a few minutes, I left and sealed everything up. Back upstairs, I played back the recording. No voice whispered my name on the audio. I felt relieved, but my gut still clenched. I still remembered what I'd heard. Later that evening, I went down one more time to grab a wrench. As soon as I stepped onto the last stair, I heard it again. It was quiet but distinct, drawn out in a soft hiss. I froze in place. My scalp tingled. I turned around slowly, the overhead light flickering above me. I muttered, "Who's there?" My voice sounded shaky. No answer. My heart pounded hard. I moved the flashlight beam around. Nothing. I stood there, breathing in short bursts, trying to figure out if I was losing my mind. The voice was right next to me, but no one was there. I took the wrench and practically ran back upstairs. Over the next few days, I avoided the basement as much as possible, but eventually I had to keep working on the renovation. Each time I stepped down there, I heard my name, sometimes behind me, sometimes near the far corner. It was always soft, like someone trying not to be heard by anyone else. Each time, I'd spin around, do a quick search, find no one, and leave as fast as I could. After about a week, the voice seemed to get closer. The first time I noticed the difference was when I felt a small gust of warm breath near my ear as it whispered. I jumped so hard I almost dropped my flashlight. My stomach churned, and I tasted acid in my throat. I felt trapped, even though I wasn't physically cornered. Every part of my body told me to run. That day, I spent the rest of my time in the upstairs rooms. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of dread. I had a list of things to finish in the basement, stuff I couldn't delay any longer. I headed down with my phone in my pocket, determined to ignore the voice if it showed up. I started painting a set of shelves. Halfway through, I heard my name again. It was so close I actually felt a vibration on my eardrum. I dropped the paint roller and turned around. My heart thudded. I shouted, "Show yourself." My voice echoed off the walls. Nothing responded. My pulse was racing. My arms felt heavy. I picked up my phone and tried to record the area, but the whisper didn't come back. I noticed I was sweating. My shirt clung to my back. I finished painting as fast as I could, not bothering to be neat. Then I left. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the corridor. Something about that empty space bothered me. The basement was weird enough, but the narrow hall leading to that bare room was always on my mind. I knew I had to check it more thoroughly, maybe knock on the walls, see if there was another hidden compartment. Even if I didn't want to do it, I couldn't leave it alone. So I went down again, flashlight in one hand, crowbar in the other, just in case I needed to pry open something. My heart pounded from the moment I opened the basement door. The steps creaked under my feet. The air felt thicker. I smelled damp concrete and old wood. I reached the trap door, dragged the crate aside and opened it. The stale smell rose up. My hands shook a bit as I descended into that short corridor once more. My flashlight beam moved along the walls. I pressed my ear against the concrete, listening for hollow spaces. I tapped with the crowbar. It all seemed solid. My shoulders were tense and my mouth felt dry. The quiet was unnerving. The only sound was my own breathing. Then I reached the small room. Same as before. Nothing but a single light bulb fixture above. I swept the crowbar across the floor, checking for gaps. Nothing. I ran my hand over the walls, feeling for cracks or unusual textures. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then I heard my name, louder than ever. It felt like someone was speaking inches from my ear. My muscles seized up, and I whirled around, shining the flashlight on every surface. My name echoed off the walls in a whisper that lingered a second too long. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. I shouted, "Where are you?" My voice echoed back to me. I got no answer. I took a step back. My knees felt weak. My body was tense, ready to bolt. The hair on my arms stood up and cold sweat trickled down my forehead. I felt watched even though I saw no one. The voice had no footsteps, no shadow, no presence I could pinpoint. I stood there for maybe a minute, but it felt like an hour. My breathing was shallow, almost like I'd just sprinted up a flight of stairs. Then I turned and hurried back to the corridor. My flashlight flickered, and that made my stomach lurch. I kept moving, stepping carefully but quickly. I was terrified the light would die. Each step I took, I expected to feel a hand on my shoulder or a breath on my neck. But nothing happened. I climbed out of the trapdoor, closed it, and shoved the crate on top again. From that point on, every single visit to the basement came with that whisper, now so clear I couldn't deny it. Sometimes it happened right when I stepped off the stairs. Other times I'd be halfway across the room before I heard it. It always used my name, in that same soft, drawn-out tone. I couldn't handle it. I started delaying any basement task, letting the house renovation fall behind schedule. My mind was scattered. My appetite shrank. I slept in fits, always waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. I tried inviting a friend over just to see if they'd hear it, but I couldn't think of a good reason to ask them to hang out in my basement. I felt embarrassed, like I'd sound crazy. I also worried that if the voice didn't appear in their presence, they'd think I was losing it. So I kept it to myself. I tried leaving the basement lights on all the time, hoping that might help. It didn't. One morning I forced myself to do laundry. The washing machine was in the basement. I told myself I could just load the clothes, start the cycle, and get out. I took a deep breath and walked downstairs. The lights were already on. I turned straight to the washing machine, started throwing clothes in. That's when I heard the whisper right by the back wall. My name again, long and drawn out. My stomach clenched. I ignored it, focusing on the laundry. I started the washer, slammed the lid, and headed for the stairs. Halfway up, I heard it again. Closer this time, practically in my ear. My legs shook, and I reached the top of the stairs out of breath. My mind raced with the question, what did it want? It never responded to me, never showed itself, never left any footprints or physical evidence. That afternoon, I decided I needed to block off the trapdoor permanently. I'd break out some cement or do whatever it took. I couldn't keep living with that corridor down there. I went to the hardware store and bought enough supplies to seal it. When I got home, I dragged everything to the basement. The voice whispered again as I placed the bags of concrete mix on the floor. I stayed focused on the task. I lifted the crate, opened the trapdoor, and checked the steps. My heart thumped so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then I started mixing concrete. I worked fast, hauling buckets of cement and pouring it into the opening. My arms burned from the effort, and I was sweating like crazy in that damp space. The entire time, I felt a strange pressure on my ears, like the air was pushing back. The whisper happened over and over, sometimes louder, sometimes softer. I refused to look around, refused to speak. I just kept pouring, layer after layer, until the hole was filled. Then I smoothed it out, leveled it, and spread it across the entire trapdoor so it was sealed shut. My back ached and my shirt was soaked. I let it dry for hours, pacing in front of the newly covered spot. By the time the top layer hardened, I was exhausted. I left the basement light on and walked upstairs. I took a long shower, trying to clear my head. I felt some relief, thinking I'd finally closed off the corridor and the empty room. That night I slept better than I had in days. No dreams, no sudden wake-ups. The next morning I felt a cautious optimism. Around noon I went back to the basement. The concrete patch looked solid. I tapped it with my foot. It was firm, no give. I exhaled, feeling some of the tension leave my body. I kept the basement door open while I sorted through boxes and cleared out old junk. For 2 whole hours I heard nothing. No whispers, no strange noises. My shoulders finally relaxed. I was heading back upstairs feeling lighter when I heard something. It was faint at first, like a breeze. Then it became clearer. My name. I froze on the second stair. The whisper came again, from somewhere near the middle of the basement floor, exactly where the trapdoor used to be. My chest tightened and cold sweat dotted my forehead. I stood there trying to process what was happening. I had sealed it. I had poured cement until the hole was gone. But the whisper was still there, closer than ever. I stared at the concrete patch, my stomach in knots. My mouth went dry and my breathing got shallow. Then the whisper called my name a third time, right at floor level. I didn't wait around for anything else. I ran up the stairs, took them 2 at a time, slammed the door and locked it. Now I'm sitting here, writing this down, trying to keep my hands from shaking. I've turned the basement light off, and I'm not planning to go down there again, at least not alone. The idea of living above whatever is still whispering my name makes my skin crawl, but I don't see any alternative. I can't move out. I sank all my money into this house. I keep listening for footsteps, but I only hear the whisper when I'm in the basement. It's never come upstairs. Still, I'm on edge. My body feels tense, and I catch myself waiting for the voice every time the house settles or the pipes rattle. I don't know what else to do besides stay out of the basement, but a part of me worries that it won't always stay down there. I'm stuck with this thing now, whatever it is. For the moment, I've decided that's enough. I'm not breaking the concrete again. I'm not exploring that corridor. I can live with the basement locked and unused. I've put a heavy chain on the door and barricaded it from the outside. I can do my laundry at a laundromat, I guess. I'm not risking another direct encounter. I just hope it never figures out how to get out of the basement, because I have no idea what I'd do if the whisper started following me upstairs. I moved into this old apartment building on a rainy Tuesday. The landlord gave me the key with a quick handshake, then left without much conversation. The place looked dark even with the lights on, and the walls felt damp when I ran my hand over them. I should have looked for something in better shape, but I needed a place fast, and the rent here was cheap. I ignored the stale smell in the hallway, figuring I could open a window and air it out once I got settled. The main room had a small window facing an alley. The paint on the windowsill was peeling, but I told myself it was good enough for now. I carried my boxes inside, placed them near the couch, and decided to unpack later. My bathroom was tiny. The sink faucet was crooked and the shower drain was slow, but nothing too bad. I noticed the mirror had a few cracks, but I didn't think much of it. I planned on hanging a new mirror anyway. That night I sat on the couch, ate a sandwich, and tried to relax. Every once in a while I heard a distant clicking sound like metal rattling inside the walls. I assumed it was the old plumbing or maybe some loose pipes. I brushed it off and kept scrolling through my phone. By midnight I felt exhausted, so I pulled out some blankets and crashed on the couch. The next morning I woke up stiff and sore. I headed to the bathroom to shower. When I stepped inside, I noticed the towel rack was empty. I remembered putting a clean towel there before going to bed. My first thought was that I'd forgotten and left it somewhere else. But a quick search of the bathroom floor and hamper turned up nothing. Confused, I grabbed a spare towel from one of my boxes. I took a short shower, dried off, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. That's when I saw a dirty plate in the sink. I stopped in my tracks. I hadn't used any plates yet. I'd eaten a sandwich straight from the wrapper the night before. I didn't even open the cabinet with the plates. I stared at that dish for a good few seconds, trying to piece it together. Maybe the landlord left it there. But it looked recently used, with fresh sauce clinging to the edges. It still smelled like tomato. My stomach twisted and I felt a small jolt of fear. I told myself there had to be a simple explanation, so I shrugged it off and washed it, then put it away in the cabinet. The rest of the day, I mostly unpacked. I worked on putting clothes in the closet, setting up my TV, and organizing the kitchen. Around noon, I walked out to grab some groceries. I locked the door behind me and tested the handle to make sure it was secure. The hallway was silent and smelled faintly of mold, but I didn't see any neighbors. The elevator took too long to come, so I took the stairs, hearing my footsteps echo against the concrete. When I came back an hour later, I unlocked the door and found one of my boxes slightly shifted. I'd left it by the couch, but now it was near the coffee table. It wasn't far, just a few feet, but it was enough to get me on edge. I checked the lock again. It wasn't damaged. There were no obvious signs of a break-in, but the box had definitely moved. I walked around the apartment, checking each room. I looked in the bathroom and bedroom closet. I even stuck my head up into the small attic hatch in the hallway, but I saw nothing strange. I kept telling myself maybe I pushed the box earlier and forgot about it. Still, my nerves were on edge. My hands felt clammy and my stomach tightened. I put the groceries away, then double-checked my windows. They were locked. I forced myself to calm down, focusing on normal routines like sorting my cereal boxes in the cabinet and organizing my fridge. That evening, I plopped onto the couch and tried to watch some TV. My eyes kept drifting to the kitchen, half expecting to see the plate reappear in the sink. By 10, I was too anxious to focus on the screen, so I turned it off. I checked the door's deadbolt twice, turned off the lights, and went to bed in the small bedroom. I closed the door and left the lamp on my nightstand lit. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like an hour before my eyes finally shut. Sometime after midnight, a noise jolted me awake. It sounded like a footstep near the hallway. My heart thumped in my chest. I lay still, breathing quietly, listening for more sounds. I heard a faint creak, then a soft thud. It reminded me of someone walking across the floor in slow, careful steps. I held my breath, feeling sweat trickle down my sides. My first thought was that someone had broken in. I reached for my phone, but it was on the nightstand. I slowly sat up, grabbed it, and turned on the screen. It read 2:13 a.m. I didn't see any light under the bedroom door, but I heard another step, then the unmistakable sound of a door softly closing. I thought about calling the cops, but I was afraid I'd look stupid if there was no real threat. So I gripped the phone, swung my legs off the bed, and tiptoed to the door. I turned the knob and cracked the door open. The hallway was dark. I flipped on the bedroom light to see better. Nothing moved. I took a few steps forward, my hands shaking. The apartment was still. I walked to the living room, flicked on the ceiling light, and searched every corner. Nothing. I peeked into the bathroom. The shower curtain was half open, revealing an empty tub. I yanked the curtain fully aside to be sure. No one there. My adrenaline was still pumping. I checked the kitchen too, but everything seemed normal. I wandered into the hallway outside my apartment, but it was empty. I felt embarrassed and relieved at the same time. Maybe I'd been dreaming. The floors in this building were old and prone to creaks. I went back inside and locked the door again, this time slipping a chair under the doorknob. I didn't sleep well after that. The next few days, small things kept happening. I'd find the couch cushions switched around. I'd see a faint outline of wet footprints in the bathroom. Sometimes I'd hear the water running in the pipes like someone was taking a shower, but when I checked, the bathroom was empty. One evening, I came home from work and smelled coffee in the air, even though I hadn't made any that morning. My nerves were shot, but I tried to hide it. I told a coworker about it, and he joked that the building was haunted. I didn't want to believe in ghosts, but it got under my skin anyway. One night, I decided to stay up. I made a pot of coffee, sat on the couch, and waited with the lights off. Around 1 a.m., I heard a soft click. It came from the hallway closet where I kept some cleaning supplies. I stood up slowly, heart pounding. I moved closer, holding my breath. Then I heard what sounded like the closet door hinge squeaking. I flicked on the light. By the time I pulled the closet door open, there was nothing inside but my broom and a few bottles of cleaner. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. No footprints, no sign of forced entry. I felt the walls. They were solid. I thought maybe there was a hidden panel, but I couldn't find anything. My head started to ache from the tension. I became fixated on the idea that someone was slipping in and out through a secret passage. I searched the whole place, knocking on walls, pulling on every handle, checking the baseboards for any loose panels. I found nothing. Eventually, I had to sleep. I felt drained, both physically and mentally. When I finally lay down, I jumped at every small noise outside. I barely slept a few hours before I had to get up for work. The strangest part was how normal the apartment looked during the day. Sunlight made everything less scary. I'd glance around and it would seem like any other small apartment. But at night I felt different, like I was sharing the space. One morning, I went to wash my face and found drops of water on the bathroom counter. The sink was still damp. My towel was wet too, even though I hadn't used it yet. I touched it, felt the cold moisture, and my body tensed up. I felt a spike of anger mixed with fear. Was someone messing with me? Was it a neighbor with a key? I told myself I'd confront the landlord, but I also worried he'd think I was crazy. That same evening, I marched down to the landlord's place on the first floor. I told him I was hearing noises at night and things were being moved around. He gave me a long look and said the building was old, with thin walls, so I might be hearing neighbors. I tried to explain the missing towels and dirty dishes, but he just shrugged. He claimed no one else had a key and said I might want to install a chain on my door if I felt unsafe. That was it. No real help. I bought a chain and installed it. I also bought a small camera, the kind meant for nurseries, but I guess that's not involving any kids. It's just a simple security camera with night vision. I placed it on a shelf in the living room, aimed toward the hallway. I wanted to see if anyone came in at night. I was sure this would give me some proof. That night, I let the camera record while I slept. In the morning, I checked the footage. For the first few hours, it was just me walking around getting ready for bed. Then around 2 a.m., when there was a small flicker on the screen. It looked like the camera was bumped or shaken. The angle shifted slightly as if someone had touched it. After that, the recording was black. The footage ended abruptly. My entire body tightened with fear. Someone must have turned it off or blocked the lens. I pulled the camera off the shelf and saw that the power cable was unplugged. I felt a jolt in my stomach that made me almost sick. I knew I hadn't done that. That day I came home from work early. I checked every inch of my apartment, looking for signs of forced entry or hidden rooms. I tapped the walls again. I opened the attic hatch in the hallway, climbed up, and shone a flashlight around the crawl space. It smelled dusty, and I had trouble breathing up there, but I still found nothing unusual. I came back down and closed the hatch. Then I inspected the windows. They were old, but locked from the inside. None of them were broken. The door was locked when I got home too, so I still had no idea how anyone could get in. That night, I couldn't relax. I sat in bed holding my phone, waiting for any sound. Around 3 a.m., I heard the floor creak in the living room. My heart started racing again. I felt adrenaline surge through my chest. I grabbed a flashlight from my nightstand, jumped out of bed, and rushed into the living room. The light caught a glimpse of movement near the closet. I was sure of it. I ran over and yanked the closet door open. Nobody was inside. My breath came in short, loud bursts. I stood there, shining my flashlight around. Nothing. I backed away, feeling more frustrated than ever. I decided to leave the apartment for a few days. I told my boss I needed some personal time. I stayed with a friend across town, sleeping on his couch. I felt safer there. My friend listened to my story, but I could see he didn't fully believe me. He suggested I might be imagining things due to stress, or maybe sleepwalking. I argued with him. I was certain that wasn't the case. I knew I was being watched or at least visited by someone, but I couldn't prove it. After a couple of nights away, I returned to my apartment. The first thing I noticed was a damp towel on the bathroom floor. My mind started racing again. I knew I'd turned off the water heater when I left, so there should have been no hot water. The towel smelled musty, like it had been used. I tossed it aside and walked out, checking the living room. My coffee table was moved a few inches from where it had been, and there was a dirty mug in the sink. I felt a wave of frustration and dread. I grabbed the mug and stared at it, seeing the faint coffee stain around the rim. My throat tightened, and my chest felt heavy. I'd had enough. I took out my phone and dialed the landlord's number again. He didn't pick up. I left a message telling him this was serious, and I wanted to break my lease. I couldn't stay in a place where I felt unsafe. After I hung up, I started packing. I threw my clothes into suitcases, jammed my books into boxes. I didn't care if I had to leave my deposit behind. I just wanted out. Halfway through packing, I heard the front door knob rattle. My heart froze. I stopped breathing for a second. Then the knob went still. I rushed to the door. It was locked. I flung it open, stepping into the hallway with my fists clenched, but no one was there. I went back inside, slammed the door, and locked it again. I heard movement in the bathroom. That was the last straw. I ran to the bathroom and yanked the door open. The shower curtain moved slightly. My throat went dry. I pulled the curtain aside. The tub was empty, water dripping from the faucet. I stood there, feeling my pulse hammer in my ears. I shut off the tap, which was barely on, and left the bathroom. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped my phone. I spent the rest of the night awake, sitting against the wall in the living room facing the front door. My suitcase and boxes were piled up next to me. I refused to sleep. Around dawn, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I checked the peephole, but saw nobody. That sound continued on and off until the sun finally came up. As soon as it was light, I grabbed my stuff, called a friend with a truck, and waited outside. I couldn't stand another minute inside that place. My friend arrived and we loaded up the truck in record time. I locked the door behind me, left the key in the landlord's mailbox, and walked away without looking back. I never found out who was sneaking around in that apartment. Maybe it was a squatter with a secret route in and out. Maybe it was a neighbor who had a key from a previous tenant. I don't have answers, and I don't want them. All I know is that I'm done with old buildings and suspicious noises at night. I found a small studio in a newer complex. It's not fancy, but it feels safe, and that's all I care about now. I don't leave my door unlocked, and I don't ignore strange noises anymore. I keep my eyes open. I stay alert. And I've promised myself, I'll never shrug off those little signs that something isn't right ever again. I still remember the exact moment when I realized something was off. I was standing by the front door of the cabin, staring at these clear footprints pressed into the fresh snow. They wrapped around the side of the house, stretched up the steps, and stopped right at my threshold. I'd only been there for a week trying to ride out the winter in this isolated spot. But right then, my gut twisted. I hadn't heard a single knock all night, and there was no sign that anyone tried to open the door. Those footprints just appeared, as though someone had walked right up and vanished. I came to the cabin because I wanted quiet. I'd planned for it, loaded my truck with enough supplies to last a couple months, mapped out the route, and made sure the generator was in good shape. I don't have a family. I don't have a steady job that ties me down. I needed a break from the usual noise of the city. The property belongs to a friend of a friend who rarely uses it, so I got it for cheap. When I arrived, the place was cold, dusty, and locked up tight. I turned on the main furnace, let the vents blow out the stale air, and hauled in the groceries. My plan was simple: read, sleep, and keep warm until spring. For the first few days, nothing felt strange. The wind rattled the trees, the crows squawked in the morning, and the ground stayed covered in a thick layer of snow. I spent the time fixing small issues around the cabin. I repaired a leaky faucet in the bathroom, tightened a few loose screws in the door hinges, and swept out some cobwebs in the corners. At night, I set up a small space heater in my bedroom, pulled thick blankets around my shoulders, and drank tea before bed. It was relaxing. I didn't expect any visitors. I had no reason to be afraid. Then on the fourth morning, I opened the front door to toss out some trash. That's when I saw the footprints. Each print was about the size of a regular boot, maybe a men's size 10. The tracks circled from the edge of the trees on the west side, cut across the yard, and went straight to the front step. My step was only partially cleared of snow, so the prints were more like deep holes right up against the door. That freaked me out. I looked around, trying to see if the person was still there. Nothing. No footprints leading away, no sign of movement. Just that row of footprints coming in from the woods, stopping at my door. I touched the doorknob and found no damage. The lock was intact. I figured maybe a hunter or a hiker came by, realized the place was occupied, and left the same way he arrived. But the lack of return footprints bothered me. I followed those tracks back into the trees. About 20 yards in, they vanished. It wasn't like the snow got softer or anything. They just stopped. I scanned the branches overhead, expecting to see broken limbs or something that suggested someone climbed up there. Nothing. The wind was blowing softly, making the pines sway. I felt my own breath catch in my throat. My ears were ringing a bit. Still, I tried to shrug it off. Maybe the wind drifted snow over the rest of the tracks. Maybe they circled around and got covered up. I returned to the cabin, shut the door, and made sure I locked it. The rest of the day I walked back and forth between windows, checking the yard. I didn't see anything suspicious. That night I kept the lights on for a while. I went from window to window again, staring out at the moonlit snow. The wind made the branches scrape against the siding. My stomach felt tense, like I'd swallowed a rock. My back muscles stayed stiff, and my shoulders ached after a while. Around midnight, I forced myself to lie down. I turned off all the lights and crawled under the blankets. I told myself not to be paranoid, just a random visitor who changed his mind. I tried to ignore my racing thoughts. The next morning, I walked outside again, determined to shake the feeling. I stepped onto the porch, carefully scanned the yard, and frowned at a new set of footprints. These led around the side of the cabin toward the back door. Once again, they ended right at the threshold. No sign of forced entry, no footprints leading away. I crouched down, touching the prints with my gloved hand. The indentation felt firm, as though it was freshly made. My breath came out in short bursts and my hands shook a little. The quiet around me felt heavier now. I locked the front door, walked around to the back door, and tested that lock too. Everything was still secure. Then I traced those footprints back into the woods, just like the day before. Again, they faded after a few yards. I kicked at the snow, searching for any sign of deeper tracks. I found nothing. It was like someone just dropped out of the sky, walked up to the cabin, and disappeared. On my way back, I heard a branch snap. I spun around. Nobody stood there. The trees were still. My heart pounded against my ribs. I hurried back inside and slammed the door. That evening, I forced myself to stick to a routine. I cooked some canned soup, ate it straight from the pot, and cleaned up in the sink. My water supply was good. The furnace was working. The generator had plenty of fuel. I tried reading a few chapters from a paperback I'd brought along, but I couldn't focus. Every few minutes, I'd think I heard something outside. Maybe steps in the snow, maybe just the wind. My chest would tighten, and I'd set down the book to listen. After a while, I gave up on reading and switched on the radio. The signal was weak. I picked up some static and bits of a local weather forecast. The forecast called for more snow. I turned off the radio and sat there in silence. My mind was racing. Before bed, I decided to shut every curtain and blind in the cabin. I checked both doors again, making sure they were locked. I double-checked the windows. They were all latched. I felt a jolt of nervous energy in my gut. My hands were sweaty even though the cabin was chilly. I breathed through my nose and tried to calm down, but it wasn't working. Finally, I climbed into bed and pulled the blankets over my head like a kid. I wish I could say that made me feel safe, but it didn't. I just lay there, staring at the darkness, listening for any scrape or thud from outside. Sometime after midnight, I heard a faint knock. It was soft, like someone tapping a knuckle against the wood. I jumped out of bed. My feet felt heavy as I walked across the room to the front door. I put my ear against it. My heart thumped so loud I couldn't tell if the knocking was still happening or if it was just my pulse. I looked through the small peephole. It was pitch black. I flicked on the porch light. The peephole showed only swirling snowflakes drifting by. No shape, no figure. I hesitated. My hand hovered near the lock. I thought about opening the door. Instead, I turned off the porch light and stepped back. For an hour, I sat on the couch waiting to see if the knock would come again. It never did. The next morning, I hesitated before opening the door. I told myself I'd check for footprints anyway. I braced myself, unlocked it, and looked down. There were fresh prints, same size as before. They lined up along the path from the tree line, stopped at the door, then vanished. I felt a wave of dizziness. My spine tingled. I yelled, "Who's there?" My voice sounded weird in that cold air, like it didn't belong to me. Nothing answered. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but my lungs felt tight. I went inside, locked the door, and paced for a bit. I kept rubbing my hands together. I felt trapped. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and I wasn't eager to drive in the snow without a good reason. Also, I didn't want to leave the cabin unattended. If someone was messing with me, I didn't want them getting in while I was gone. After pacing around, I decided to set up a simple alarm system. I had a few old tin cans and some fishing line in my supplies. I rigged the fishing line around the perimeter of the porch so that if someone stepped on it, the cans would rattle. Then I took some salt and spread it around the doors and windows, hoping I could spot footprints more clearly. It was a desperate measure, but I had to do something. I spent the rest of the day in a weird state, half expecting the sound of rattling cans at any moment. Nightfall came faster than I wanted. The wind picked up. I felt the cabin walls creak a bit. I turned off most of the lights, leaving only a small lamp in the living room. I sat there with a flashlight in one hand, staring at the front door. The place was quiet, except for the hum of the furnace. Around 10 p.m., I heard a metallic clang from outside. I jumped to my feet, my heart thudding. I slipped on my boots, grabbed the flashlight, and rushed to the door. I paused, listened. Another clang. I opened the door a crack and pointed the flashlight around. My fishing line was swaying and the cans were scattered across the porch, but I saw no one. Snow was falling in thick clumps and my breath came out in short bursts. I shut the door again, locked it, and moved away. I forced myself to wait inside, scanning the windows, checking the back door once more. Everything stayed still. Eventually, I tried to sleep. I dozed off in the living room, still wearing most of my clothes. In the middle of the night, I stirred. I thought I heard a crunch outside, like footsteps. I tensed up, but I stayed on the couch. I didn't have the nerve to open the door. I just lay there, eyes wide, waiting for morning light. At dawn, I got up, pressed my ear to the door again, and slowly unlatched it. I stepped onto the porch and looked at the new snowdrifts. There were footprints again, only this time they were around the entire cabin. They circled it, stopping at every window and both doors. I felt a jolt of panic. My legs went weak. The prints were close to the walls, like someone had pressed up against the cabin, trying to look in. I walked around the house, following the tracks. They led back to that same clump of trees. Then, as always, they vanished. The snow had barely had time to fill them in, so they must have been made just a few hours earlier. My hands were shaking. I realized I'd been clenching my jaw so hard my teeth hurt. I yelled again, my voice cracking, "Who's out here?" The pines rustled in the wind, but nothing else moved. I had a sudden thought. Maybe I should leave. But I didn't want to drive blind through thick snow. The road was tricky, even in good weather. My truck was old and the tires weren't great. Plus, the main highway was a long way off, and I wasn't sure if the plows had cleared it. I went back inside and locked up again. I stood in the middle of the living room, glancing at the windows, wondering if someone was watching me. For the next few days, it was the same. Each morning, new footprints. always leading right up to a door or window, then stopping. I couldn't catch whoever was doing it. The fishing line alarm went off twice more, both times in the middle of the night. Each time I rushed out there with a flashlight and never saw anyone. I kept thinking I heard low creaks on the steps or faint knocks on the walls, but whenever I tried to pinpoint it, everything went silent. I couldn't sleep well. My eyes burned from exhaustion, and my muscles ached from being constantly tense. I felt pinned down by fear. My appetite dwindled. My mind started running in circles. I'd ask myself if this could be an animal, but the footprints looked human. I'd wonder if it was some local playing a prank, but it didn't feel like a joke. One night I decided to stay up until dawn. I kept a heavy flashlight and a shovel near the door. I left one small lamp on. I tried not to blink for too long, scanning the windows every few minutes. Around 3 a.m., I heard a scratching sound near the back door. It was slow and soft. I gripped the shovel and crept across the living room. My heartbeat hammered in my ears. I reached the back door, held my breath, and waited. The scratching stopped. I flipped the porch light switch. Through the window beside the door, I saw nothing but drifting snow. I clenched the shovel handle so tight my knuckles hurt. I opened the door a few inches, bracing myself. Outside, the porch was empty. I shut the door, locked it again. By the time morning came, I felt wiped out. I pushed open the front door to see if any footprints had shown up in those last hours. Of course they had. A single set walked from the forest straight to the door, right where I'd been sitting, awake, only a few feet away. Somehow, I hadn't heard or seen a thing. My brain buzzed with frustration and fear. I was close to throwing my stuff in the truck and leaving, road conditions be damned. But a part of me felt that if I ran, whoever was doing this would follow me, or worse, break in the moment I was gone. I spent that day reinforcing the doors. I pushed a heavy dresser in front of the back door. I nailed a couple of boards across the windows, at least the ones that could be reached from the ground. The cabin looked like I was preparing for a riot, but I didn't care. I wanted a barrier between me and whoever might be out there. I tested the generator again, checked the fuel, and made sure I had my flashlight batteries lined up. By nightfall, I sat in the middle of the living room with all the lamps on, feeling my pulse race with every tiny sound. At around midnight, the furnace kicked on, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. My nerves were shot. I paced around until I felt my legs ache. I drank water straight from the bottle, gulping it down like I'd just run a race. The night passed slowly. I listened. I didn't hear the cans rattle or the scratching on the door. I told myself maybe the boards and furniture had scared them off. Maybe they gave up. But in the morning, I found new footprints again. Now they covered every single boarded window. I could see where someone had stood right up against the wood. My chest felt tight. My hands were numb. I backed up from the window. The boards hadn't been pried off, but they were scuffed, like fingers or something had scraped across them. I knew I couldn't stay any longer. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed it with the essentials, and put on my coat. I went outside and brushed the snow off my truck. My breath clouded in front of me. The morning sky was cloudy, threatening more snow. I hopped in the cab, started the engine, and cranked the heat. As I backed up, I glanced at the cabin. I swore I saw a shape in the window, but I can't be sure. It could have been my own reflection. I didn't stop to investigate. I drove down that narrow road, sliding a bit on the ice, gripping the wheel until my hands cramped. On the way out, I kept checking the rearview mirror. I half expected to see someone sprinting behind me. The trees looked so still and empty, but I felt watched. The entire drive to the main highway was tense. I arrived at a small service station, filled up the tank, and sat there for a while, breathing. My shoulders finally relaxed. I never reported anything to the local sheriff. I wasn't sure what I'd say. There wasn't a crime, not in the usual sense. No one broke in. Nothing was stolen. There were just footprints that led nowhere, every single night, ending at my door. I haven't gone back to that cabin. I've thought about it, just to see if there'd be more footprints. but every time I consider it, I feel a chill in my spine. I still don't have a clue who made them or why. All I know is that for those weeks, I felt trapped. I felt watched. Maybe there's some explanation, some strange neighbor messing with me, some trick of the snowdrifts. But I was there. I saw how clear those prints were. I heard the scratching on the door. I felt that knock late at night. That's all I can say. It was real to me. And I can't shake the feeling that something else was waiting out there in the snow, even when I locked every door and window. I felt something was off the minute I stepped onto my new floor. The hallway was neat and clean, but it was too quiet. I didn't hear any traffic, and I didn't hear any TVs or voices. It was like being in a vacuum. I shrugged it off at first because I was tired from the move. But I couldn't shake that feeling that something wasn't right. I had come here for convenience and a fresh start. The rent wasn't cheap, but the location was perfect for my job. I didn't expect the total silence. I thought I would hear cars honking outside or maybe somebody arguing next door, but I heard nothing. It was the first clue that my new life in this building wouldn't be normal. I walked into my apartment on that first day, dropped my bags on the floor, and took a look around. The living room was small, with a window facing the main street. I tried to open the window to let in some air, but it stuck. I gave it a couple of tugs until it finally slid open. When I leaned out, I realized I couldn't hear anything. Down on the street, cars were moving, but they seemed distant, like they were part of a silent movie. It wasn't just an old window. Even with it wide open, the noise from outside barely reached me. I figured maybe there was some special soundproofing in this building. I remember feeling relieved because I like it quiet when I sleep. I didn't know how unusual it really was. That first night, I managed to unpack most of my stuff. I set up my bed, my TV, my small couch, and a couple of lamps. I realized I was missing a few groceries, so I took the elevator down and walked to a small market around the corner. On the way, I heard the normal hustle and bustle of downtown traffic. Horns, engines, the rumble of the city. Everything seemed normal outside. When I got back upstairs, I stepped out of the elevator and was hit by that same eerie silence in the hallway. The difference between the noisy street and this dead quiet corridor made me pause. I glanced around, but I didn't see anyone. I couldn't smell anything either. Usually, apartment hallways smell like cleaning products or somebody's cooking. Not here. It felt like walking into a sealed box. Inside my apartment, I ate some of the snacks I'd bought, watched a little TV, and tried to relax. The walls were thick, which I appreciated. Sometimes older buildings have thin walls and you can hear every conversation or every step from your neighbors. This place seemed to have none of that. I started to wonder if I even had neighbors. Every door on my floor looked the same, and I didn't see any signs of life. I told myself that maybe they were empty units or the tenants traveled a lot. Around midnight, I shut off the TV and tried to sleep. The bed felt comfortable enough, and the darkness of the room didn't bother me. Usually city lights seep in through the curtains, but the curtains here were heavy, and I liked the total darkness. I assumed I would sleep like a rock. I was just starting to drift off when I heard a scratching noise. At first, I thought it was coming from inside the apartment. I sat up in bed, looked around, and listened carefully. It sounded like something scraping against a wall. I got up and walked to the living room, checking if maybe there was a branch hitting the window or a loose cable. But I saw nothing unusual. The scratching stopped after about 10 seconds. I chalked it up to a pipe in the wall, or maybe my imagination. I went back to bed, telling myself not to be so jumpy. I managed to sleep, but it was a light sleep. I kept waking up, wondering if I would hear that scratching again. The next day, I woke up early for work, feeling a little groggy. In the hallway, everything still looked normal, but it was dead quiet. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button. I glanced at the door across from mine, but there was no nameplate, no decorations, no sound. I rode down in silence, and the moment I stepped outside, the everyday city noise rushed back in. It was almost comforting. I worked all day, trying not to think too much about my new place, but I felt a little uneasy. I told a coworker about it during lunch how weirdly quiet my apartment was, and he said maybe the building had top-tier sound insulation. I joked that it was a little too effective. He laughed, and I tried to forget about it. That evening, I got home around 8. The hallway was dark because one of the overhead lights was out. I reached my door and realized I still hadn't heard a single person on my floor. No footsteps, no music, no doors opening or closing. It was getting under my skin, but I kept telling myself to calm down. Maybe everyone else was on vacation, or maybe there were offices here and not many actual residents. I went inside and turned on every light. I set my groceries on the kitchen counter and made myself some dinner. I watched TV for a while, and the quiet hallway faded from my thoughts. I felt better once I was distracted by a show. Around 11, I turned off the TV and walked to my bedroom. I was about to lie down when I heard the scratching again. It was faint, like it was coming from far away. I froze and listened. The sound repeated every few seconds, like something rubbing against a wall. My heart started pounding. The back of my neck felt tight. I turned on the lights in my bedroom and stood there waiting to hear it again. It kept going. I couldn't tell if it was coming from above, below, or next door. It sounded like it was in the walls. I opened my apartment door and stuck my head out into the hallway. The corridor lights were dim and the silence out there was complete. I couldn't hear the scratching from the hallway. It only seemed audible inside my apartment. I shut the door slowly and locked it. My palms felt clammy. I stood in my living room, not sure what to do. Eventually, the scratching stopped. I told myself I was probably imagining it. For the next few days, I tried to ignore the whole thing. I went to work and came home. The hallway stayed silent. The scratching came and went at night, but it always faded before I could investigate. On Friday, I decided to talk to the building manager. I went to the management office on the ground floor during my lunch break. The manager was an older man with a blank expression. He barely looked up from his desk when I asked if there were any issues with rodents or plumbing. He said no. I asked if the building was fully occupied. He said most of the floors were, but my floor only had a couple of residents. He didn't offer more details. I felt a little uneasy talking to him. He seemed uninterested in my concerns. He just told me to fill out a maintenance request if I heard anything else strange. That night I got home feeling tense. I kept expecting to run into someone else in the hallway, but I never did. I pressed my ear against the door next to mine and listened. Nothing. No TV, no music, no shuffling. I tried the same with the door across from me. Same silence. I felt weird doing that, but I needed to know if anyone was actually there. I gave up and went into my apartment. The rest of the evening was quiet until around midnight. That scratching sound returned, but this time it was louder. It seemed to come from the corner of the living room. I went over there and put my ear to the wall. My heart was beating so hard that my chest felt tight. I heard a soft scraping sound behind the drywall. It was like something was trying to dig through. I banged on the wall with my fist. The noise stopped right away. I held my breath and stepped back. I stood there for a minute, waiting to see if it would start again, but it didn't. I felt a wave of relief, but it didn't last long. I realized I was starting to sweat. My shirt stuck to my back. I wiped my forehead, turned off the lights, and went to bed. I couldn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured something on the other side of that wall. Saturday, I decided to spend more time investigating. I stayed in the apartment all day, listening for any sounds. I turned off the TV and just sat in my living room. It felt strange because of how quiet everything was. It was like living in a soundproof box. The only time I heard a normal city noise was when I opened the window. Even then, the sounds were dull, like someone had stuffed cotton in my ears. Around midday, I walked around the entire floor. I knocked on a few doors, but no one answered. I found a stairwell at the far end of the hall. It was clean, and the light was working there, but I didn't see any signs of life. I realized I felt alone in this place, and it made my stomach twist. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was just a quiet building. That night, I braced myself for the scratching. Sure enough, around 11:30, it started. This time it sounded closer, almost like it was on the other side of my living room wall but near the floor. I could hear a slow, steady scrape, then a pause, then another scrape. My pulse was racing. The hairs on my arms stood up. I grabbed a flashlight from my kitchen drawer even though the lights were on. I felt silly, but I needed something in my hand. I walked to the wall, crouched down, and placed my ear against it. The drywall felt cool. I could hear the scratching more clearly. It was deliberate. I felt my stomach tighten. I shouted, "Hello? Who's there?" My voice sounded too loud in that silent apartment. The scratching paused, then started again. I banged on the wall and said, "Stop!" It kept going for a few seconds, then it just ended. I realized my breathing was rapid. My chest felt tight. I dropped the flashlight because my hands were shaking. It hit the floor and rolled under the coffee table. I sat on my couch for a long time staring at that spot on the wall. I couldn't come up with a logical explanation. No rats or mice would scratch with that pattern. It sounded too deliberate. I felt like someone was messing with me. I decided I needed to see if the scratching might be coming from an adjacent unit. I checked a floor plan of the building online, and I saw that the apartment next to mine shared that living room wall. I memorized the unit number and planned to speak with whoever lived there. On Sunday morning, I got up early and went next door. I knocked a few times, but no one answered. I pressed my ear to the door again. Silence. I tried the doorknob, but it was locked. I felt like a trespasser, but I was desperate for answers. I went down to the building manager again and asked if I could talk to the tenant in that specific unit. He said that unit was vacant. I asked how long. He said at least 6 months. I asked if maintenance might be in there at night. He said no. I asked if there were any hidden pipes or mechanical systems in that wall. He just shrugged and said everything was normal. I felt my frustration building, but he didn't seem to care. I went back upstairs, stood outside that vacant apartment and wondered if someone had broken in. But the lock looked fine. No signs of forced entry. My heart thumped in my chest as I realized I was left with no clear explanation. That evening, the scratching returned just before midnight. It was louder than before, and it seemed to come from multiple spots. I could hear it behind the wall near the kitchen and also near the window in the living room. I ran to each spot trying to track it. Every time I got close, the sound stopped. Then it would start again from somewhere else. I was sweating and breathing hard. My eyes darted around and I felt dizzy. I shouted, "Who's there?" But no one responded. I called a friend and told him I was freaking out, but I tried to keep my voice steady. He said maybe I should crash at his place, but I didn't want to run away. I needed to figure this out. Around 2 in the morning, the scratching finally stopped. I sat on my couch exhausted until I dozed off. When I woke up, it was almost 9 p.m. I stumbled into the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and tried to wake up. My head felt heavy. I thought about calling an exterminator, but that didn't feel right. This didn't sound like normal pests. It sounded like a person. But who? And how? I decided to check the vacant apartment. I knew it was locked, but I wanted to see if there was a way in through the stairwell or a fire escape. I found the fire escape in the hallway. The metal door was locked from the inside, and I couldn't open it without a key. I checked the exterior of the building from the ground floor. There were metal stairs on the side, but they didn't appear to lead directly into that unit. I realized my options were limited. I went back to my apartment and thought about calling the police, but what would I say? I hear scratching in the walls. It sounded ridiculous. There was no threat of violence, and I had zero proof of anything illegal. For the next several days, the pattern repeated. Quiet days, horrifying nights. The scratching would start at random times, always late, always moving around the walls. I tried leaving music on to drown it out, but I could still hear it. Sometimes it got so close that I swore it was right behind the drywall in front of me. I knocked, I shouted. I even tried playing loud sounds from my phone against the wall to see if that would scare off whatever it was. Nothing worked. My body started reacting. My hands shook, my appetite vanished, and I had trouble focusing at work. I kept glancing around my own apartment like I was expecting something to jump out of the walls. One night, around 3 a.m., I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I packed an overnight bag and left my apartment. The hallway was dark again because that same light never got replaced. I walked to the elevator, feeling my heart pound. As I was waiting for the elevator doors to open, I swore I heard a faint scratching sound coming from somewhere behind me, but I didn't turn around. I got in, pressed the lobby button, and kept my eyes on the door. When I reached the ground floor, I stepped outside and felt a blast of normal city noise. I took a deep breath and felt immediate relief. My whole body relaxed. I found a nearby coffee shop that was open late and spent the rest of the night there, just drinking coffee and trying to stay awake. I didn't care about the time. I just needed to be anywhere but that apartment. Now I'm not sure what my next step will be. I can't keep living like this. Every night the silence takes over my floor and the scratching gets closer. I'm going to ask the manager to move me to another unit or break my lease. I don't know what's behind those walls and I don't want to find out. All I know is that something isn't right in that apartment. The silence is overwhelming, and the scratching never really stops. I don't care if people think I'm paranoid. I need to leave before this consumes my mind. That's my plan. I don't have a better explanation. I just know I'm done. If there's one lesson I've learned, it's that sometimes silence is worse than any noise. And whatever is causing that scratching doesn't seem to care if I want peace. It's there, night after night, reminding me that I'm not alone on that silent floor. I can't see it, I can't prove it, but I hear it. And that's enough to make me leave. I remember the exact moment it started. I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling in the middle of a downpour. Rain beat against my bedroom window, and I was wide awake. My sheets felt damp because the humidity in my apartment was higher than usual. My throat felt scratchy and I kept swallowing to clear it. I'd already turned out the lights in the living room, double-checked the locks on my front door, and made sure my windows were shut. Everything was supposed to be peaceful, but something felt off. I heard a dripping noise from my kitchen sink, so I got up and walked to the kitchen in the dark. I didn't bother turning on the overhead light. I felt my way around by lightly tracing my hand along the wall. The hallway in my place is pretty short, so it only took a few steps to get there. The kitchen smelled like old coffee grounds because I'd left the filter in the trash can for a while. I reached the faucet, tightened it, and heard the dripping stop. I stood there for a moment to confirm it was really off. Then I heard something else. Soft shuffling in the corridor outside my bedroom. At first, I thought it might be the building's old pipes or the wind in the ventilation system, but it wasn't. It had a distinct rhythm, like footsteps. My heart started thudding in my chest. I don't normally scare easy, but hearing footsteps in my apartment at that time of night felt wrong. I live alone. There shouldn't have been anyone else inside. I had locked the front door. I left the kitchen slowly, not wanting to make noise. My socks slid a bit on the floor, so I took each step carefully. I stood in the living room, trying to see down the dark hallway to my bedroom. I could still hear the rain hitting the windows, but now I also heard that slow, steady tread. It was definitely coming from the hallway. It sounded like someone taking one step at a time, pausing, then taking another. I reached out and flipped the living room light switch. The overhead lamp flickered on, and I saw the corridor partially illuminated. It looked empty. I couldn't see anything moving, but the footsteps sounded like they were still there. It was as if they were right around the corner, outside my bedroom door. I felt my breathing get shallow. My mouth was dry. I tried to swallow, but I had no saliva left. The hair on my arms stood up, and I felt my pulse throbbing in my temples. I took a few steps forward, wanting to check the bedroom. The hallway floor creaked under me. The footsteps seemed to pause. I stood still, listening. My body felt like it was bracing for something to jump out at me. My mind raced. I thought about grabbing something to use as a weapon, but I didn't have anything close by. The only thing near me was a decorative vase on a side table. but I didn't want to start swinging a vase around unless I was sure I needed to defend myself. The footsteps stayed put, right outside my bedroom door. It sounded like they were hesitating. I inched closer. I kept expecting to see a silhouette or a shadow, but there was nothing. I approached the doorway to my bedroom and put my hand on the frame. My bedroom door was slightly ajar, just the way I'd left it. I pushed it fully open and looked inside. The window was closed, the curtains drawn, and my bed was unmade. No one was there. I stood there for a few seconds, just scanning every inch of the room. The closet door was open too, and there was no one hiding in there. I let out a shaky breath. Then I heard another step in the corridor behind me. It was deliberate. The floor creaked in the spot near the bathroom door. I spun around so fast that my foot twisted a bit and I almost stumbled. I flicked the bedroom light on so I could see better. The hallway was still empty. The living room light was still on, so the entire corridor was lit. There was nothing visible. My heart pounded even harder. I felt a drop of sweat slide down the side of my face. I stood with my back to my bedroom door, staring at the hallway. The footsteps started again, slowly moving toward me. I could hear each step land with a soft thud on the old wooden floor. I felt a chill spread across my neck and shoulders. I had a sudden impulse to speak, to tell whoever it was to leave, but I couldn't make my voice work. My mind was full of scattered thoughts. Should I call the police? Should I run to the front door and get out? But part of me wanted to confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. I took a deep breath, stepped forward, and reached for the hallway light switch. I flipped it on, and the overhead fixture buzzed for a moment before lighting up the corridor completely. The footsteps stopped. Silence filled the air, broken only by the sound of rain outside. I stood there for at least a minute, not moving, listening for any more sounds. Nothing happened. The corridor was empty. My eyes scanned from the living room entrance to the bathroom door to the small coat closet at the end. Everything looked normal. I breathed out, feeling my pulse slow a bit. My body was still tense, but I tried to calm myself by taking slow, measured breaths. I decided to check every corner of my apartment. I started with the bathroom. I pushed the door open, turned on the light, and saw my usual mess. Towels piled in a corner, a toothbrush on the sink, and an empty soap dispenser I kept forgetting to replace. No one was there. I checked the shower just in case. Nothing. Next, I moved to the coat closet in the hallway. I opened it, pushed aside my jackets, and looked at the floor. It was filled with old shoes and a couple of boxes. No sign of anyone hiding. I closed it again. Then I walked through the living room, the small dining area, and the kitchen. Nothing. Everything was in its place. When I was done, I stood in the middle of the living room. The adrenaline rush was wearing off, and I felt a little lightheaded. My stomach churned, and I noticed how tense my neck was. The clock on my wall said it was close to midnight. The rain was still pounding, and I realized I was cold. My t-shirt felt clammy against my skin. I didn't want to stay up all night, but I didn't know how I was going to sleep. Still, I told myself I was probably imagining things. Maybe I'd dozed off and half-dreamed the sounds. I decided to go back to bed and try to rest. I left the living room light on, though. I wasn't about to plunge the place into complete darkness again. I went back to my room, left the door open, and climbed into bed. I felt exposed with the hallway light on, but at least I could see if something moved. I pulled the blanket up to my chest and tried to relax. I focused on the rain outside, letting the repetitive sound calm my nerves. I drifted off at some point, but I couldn't have slept long before I was jolted awake again by the same slow footsteps. I sat up so fast that my head spun. The footsteps were in the hallway just outside my bedroom, just like before. My heart rate shot up. My throat tightened and I could feel the rush of heat in my face. The hallway light was still on, so I could see everything, but there was no one there. Yet the floor was creaking in soft intervals. I felt panic well up in my chest. I looked at my phone on the nightstand, thinking about calling the police. But I hesitated. What would I say? I hear footsteps, but I can't see anyone. They'd probably think I was hallucinating or messing with them. I slid out of bed, every muscle in my body tensing up. I stood in the doorway to my room and stared at the spot on the floor that kept creaking. The sound was about 5 feet in front of me. I could practically pinpoint the exact board that was shifting. I was wide awake now. No chance I was dreaming. The footsteps continued, one after another, at a measured pace. They stopped right in front of me. I was shaking. I tried to reach out, thinking maybe I'd feel a draft or some weird shift in the air. My hand touched nothing but empty space. My skin prickled. My breath caught in my throat. I stayed there for a long moment. The footsteps didn't move. It felt like someone was standing there, just staring at me, but I saw nothing. I wanted to speak, but I didn't know what to say. My body was tense from head to toe. My heart pounded in my ears and every breath felt forced. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps retreated back down the hallway. The floor creaked in reverse order. I could hear each step move away from me, heading toward the living room. I followed the sound, stepping carefully, my knees feeling weak. By the time I reached the living room, the footsteps had vanished. Everything was still. The lights were on, and the shadows were ordinary. I glanced around, searching for some clue. My furniture looked normal. My couch was there, a couple of pillows tossed around. The TV was off, the remote on the coffee table. I forced myself to check the front door again. It was still locked. I even pulled on it to make sure. It didn't budge. I felt trapped in my own home, unsure of what was happening. I decided to stay awake the rest of the night. I couldn't stand the idea of lying back down in that bed, waiting for the footsteps to return. I sat on my couch with the lights on. I tried to watch something on my phone, but my internet connection was spotty because of the storm. The Wi-Fi kept cutting out, so I gave up. I just sat there, arms folded, listening to the rain. I tried to figure out a logical explanation. Maybe my downstairs neighbor was walking around, and the sound was traveling through the building's old floors. But it didn't make sense. I know what footsteps from below sound like, and these were definitely in my hallway. Around 2 a.m., I stood up and walked around the apartment again. I just needed to move. My limbs felt stiff from tension. I stretched my neck and rolled my shoulders, trying to release some of the tightness. Then I realized I needed to use the bathroom. It felt eerie walking down the hallway. The place was silent except for my own steps. I half expected to hear that slow tread appear behind me, but there was nothing. I flipped the bathroom light on, relieved myself, and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, and my hair was messed up. I felt exhausted. I went back to the living room and sat down again. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't have the energy to focus on anything else. I kept thinking about the sound of the footsteps. They weren't frantic or rushed. They were hesitant, like someone who didn't belong here and wasn't sure if they should proceed. Yet they always stopped right outside my bedroom. That part got to me the most. It was like someone was checking on me or waiting for me. My gut felt twisted, and I had to keep reminding myself to take slow breaths. A bit after 3 a.m., I noticed the rain had started to let up. The pounding on the windows was softer now. I listened for any sign of movement in the hallway. All I heard was the drip of water from the gutters outside. My body was desperate for sleep, but I was wired with anxiety. I decided to stand by the front door, ready to bolt if the footsteps came back. I felt like that was my only option if things got worse. I stood there for a few minutes, not moving, just listening. Then I heard it again. A single creak in the hallway, closer to the bedroom. My heart rate spiked. I forced myself to step into the corridor. The overhead light was still on, so everything was illuminated. I heard 2 more steps, slow and deliberate. My breathing was ragged. I noticed my hands were trembling. I could see the floorboards flex slightly, as if some weight was pressing on them. But there was no figure, no shape, just the bare wooden planks moving like someone invisible was there. I stared, my eyes glued to that spot. The footsteps turned toward me. I felt my mind race with the urge to run. I stepped back into the living room, keeping my eyes on the hallway. The footsteps came closer. My hands were shaking so much that I had to clench them. I tried to call out something like, "Who's there?" But it came out weak. The footsteps paused. I felt heat rising in my face. My heart thumped so hard it almost hurt. Then, after a few seconds, the footsteps moved back down the hallway, toward my bedroom again. I heard them stop in front of my bedroom door. The silence was overwhelming. I tiptoed closer, peeking around the corner. I saw the door was still open and the light inside was off. I took a few cautious steps, not letting my heels press down too hard on the floor. I didn't want to make a noise. When I got close, I listened for breathing or any other sound. I heard only the faint drip from the kitchen faucet and the soft hush of the rain outside. My bedroom was still. I flicked the switch on the wall and the bedroom light snapped on, revealing the empty room again. I felt something tighten in my chest. Every muscle in my body was on high alert. I stood there scanning the floor, the bed, the walls, the closet. Nothing was out of place. Yet I couldn't deny what I'd heard. I turned around, backing away from the bedroom, and retreated to the living room. At that point, I decided there was no way I was sleeping that night. I sat in the corner of the couch with my knees pulled up, keeping the lights on. I remember checking my phone and seeing that it was almost 4 a.m. I stayed that way until morning. The footsteps didn't return again, or if they did, I didn't hear them. Maybe I dozed off for a few minutes here and there, but I mostly just stayed alert, trying not to freak out at every little noise. The storm passed around dawn, and the apartment started to brighten from the morning light. My clothes felt sticky with sweat. I got up, walked to the window, and saw the wet streets below. Cars passed by. I felt a small bit of relief seeing people outside going about their morning. I stood there, not sure what to do next. Eventually, I walked to my bedroom and grabbed fresh clothes. I took a quick shower, letting the hot water blast my face in an attempt to wake me up. My mind replayed every sound I'd heard overnight. I shut the water off and dried myself, listening for anything suspicious. It was quiet. I dressed and walked back into the hallway. Everything seemed normal again in the daylight. The wooden floor looked ordinary, and my bedroom door was right where it should be. But I couldn't shake the memory of those slow, hesitant steps. I spent the rest of the day feeling on edge. I wanted to talk to someone about it, but I didn't know where to start. I didn't want anyone thinking I was losing it. I tried to go about my usual routine, but I felt trapped in my own head. Every time I passed the hallway, I paused and listened. When I went to bed that next night, I left multiple lights on. I propped my bedroom door open, and I kept my phone in my hand, ready to call for help if the footsteps returned. And they did return. They returned again and again on different nights, always with the same slow, deliberate pattern, always stopping right in front of my bedroom door. No matter how many times I checked, I never found anyone in my apartment. No one ever came in, no one ever appeared. But the steps kept happening. I tried recording them on my phone, but the audio always came out faint or mixed with ambient noise. I tried sleeping with earplugs, but I could still feel the vibrations in the floor. After each time, I'd search every nook and cranny, and I'd find nothing out of place. It's been going on for a while now, and I still don't have answers. I'm just stuck in this strange cycle, hearing those footsteps at night, unable to find any explanation. They're always slow and hesitant, and they always stop right at my bedroom door, like someone standing there watching. And that's my story. I live with it, night after night, in this small apartment where I'm supposed to be alone. I've never gotten used to it, but I've learned to manage my fear. I keep every light on, and I stay alert. The rain doesn't help. I associate it with the first night I heard those steps. But even on clear nights, I sometimes wake up to that same dreadful sound, letting me know I'm not as alone as I want to believe. And every time, the steps end at my door, but no one ever enters. I still remember the first time I saw that old armchair in the antique store. It looked solid and heavy, with faded upholstery and scratches along the wooden arms. The price was low, and I needed extra seating for my living room. I didn't think much about it. I just paid, brought it home, and set it in the corner by the window. It felt like any other used piece of furniture. Now I wish I had never bought it. I live alone in a small single-story house. It's quiet here most nights. Sometimes I hear the wind outside, or I hear the refrigerator clicking on and off in the kitchen. Otherwise, it's calm. A few weeks after I got that armchair, I started to notice little things. At first, I thought I was just tired. I'd come home from work and see the armchair in a slightly different position. Maybe it was angled a bit more toward the door. Maybe it was turned a little more toward the hallway. I assumed I had bumped into it or nudged it while vacuuming. But as time went on, these shifts became more obvious. One night I came home late from a friend's house. I walked into the living room, and I stopped. The armchair was facing the bedroom hallway. That was weird because I always leave it facing the TV. I told myself I was mixing up my memories. I told myself maybe I had turned it that way earlier and forgot. I felt a bit uneasy, but I shrugged it off. I sat down on my couch, watched some TV, and tried not to stare at the armchair. The first time I smelled that strange odor, it was around midnight. I'd been lying in bed trying to fall asleep. Suddenly I got a whiff of something rotten. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was there. I sat up, turned on the light, and sniffed around the room. I thought maybe the trash in the kitchen needed to be taken out. I got up, walked around, checked the trash. It was fine. I checked the sink. Nothing there. I walked into the living room and noticed the armchair again. It seemed closer to the window than before, like it had scooted a few inches. My mind was racing, but I still tried to push it aside. I opened a window to get fresh air, but the smell lingered for a few more minutes before it disappeared. Over the next several nights, the armchair kept changing positions. Sometimes I found it tilted toward the front door. Other times it was pointed right at the couch. Once I even discovered it facing my bedroom door. Each time that foul smell would drift by, last for a while, then fade. I began to check all around the living room every morning, making sure I wasn't missing something obvious, like a dead animal in the walls or a moldy patch in the corner. I never found a source. The smell didn't return during the daytime, only at night. I started sleeping poorly. My head would fill with questions. How was the armchair moving? Was I sleepwalking and doing it myself? Was someone breaking into my house? I checked the locks on my doors and windows. I even set up a simple piece of tape across the door frames at night to see if they'd been disturbed. They never were. I considered putting a camera in the living room, but I held off. Part of me didn't want to see what might show up on a recording. Each night I'd walk around the house, checking corners, looking for any sign that someone else had been inside. I'd peer under my bed, check the closets, and make sure every window was locked. I started turning on a small lamp in the living room at bedtime. That lamp cast a weak light across the furniture. If I woke up in the middle of the night, I would look down the hall from my bedroom and see the edges of the armchair. I told myself that maybe I'd catch it moving. That never happened, but sometimes I felt certain it had changed positions, even if just an inch or two by the time morning came. I remember one night in particular. I'd had a stressful day. I was exhausted. I fell asleep around 10. Sometime before dawn, I woke up because of that same nauseating smell. My eyes shot open, and my heart thumped hard in my chest. I jumped out of bed and flicked on the bedroom light. I walked into the hallway and the smell got stronger. I flipped on the living room light. The armchair was turned completely toward my bedroom door, like it was staring right at it. My hands started to shake. My mouth went dry. I looked around, convinced someone was hiding behind the furniture. I checked the windows and the door, but nothing was broken or unlocked. I returned to bed, but I didn't sleep much. I kept tossing and turning, listening for any noise. The next morning, I decided to move the armchair out to the garage. I grabbed it by the wooden arms and dragged it across the floor. It left scratches on the hardwood, but I didn't care. I struggled to get it through the doorway and down the small step into the garage, but I forced it in there. I left it in the middle of the garage, facing a blank wall. I dusted off my hands and locked the door behind me. That night, I slept better. I still felt uneasy, but at least I knew the armchair was out of the house. When I got up in the morning, I walked into the garage to check on it. It was in the same spot. I felt a small wave of relief. I went to work, feeling less anxious. I came home that evening, made some dinner, and relaxed in the living room. I still felt a little on edge, but I told myself the worst was over. Then, around midnight, I heard a scraping sound from the garage. I bolted upright on the couch. My heart pounded in my ears. I picked up a flashlight and walked to the door that leads into the garage. I opened it slowly, shining the light in front of me. The armchair was right where I had left it, but it was slightly tilted. It looked like it had pivoted toward the door. My chest tightened and I felt cold sweat on my forehead. I stepped forward and stared at it for a full minute. I noticed that same rotten smell drifting around me. I backed out and closed the door. I couldn't sleep the rest of that night. Every time I shut my eyes, I imagined the armchair scraping across the garage floor on its own. I kept hearing noises in my mind, though I wasn't sure if they were real. Around 3 in the morning, I felt compelled to check the garage again. I tiptoed to the door, but I didn't open it. I placed my ear against the wood. The house was silent, except for a faint hum from the refrigerator. I didn't smell that odor anymore. I went back to my bed and lay there until sunrise. The next day, I decided to get rid of the armchair. I called a junk removal service, but they were backed up for a week. I considered taking it to the dump myself, but I drive a small car and the armchair wouldn't fit. I called a buddy who has a pickup truck, but he was out of town for a few days. I felt stuck with it, so I decided to keep it in the garage until I could haul it away. That evening, I tried to ignore the fact that it was still in my garage. I ate a quick dinner and watched some TV. At one point, I heard a light thumping noise from outside. I turned the TV volume down and listened. It sounded like something brushing against a wall. My throat went dry. I stood up and walked to the garage door. I stood there, my ear close to the wood. I heard a soft scraping sound, almost like fabric dragging across the concrete floor. I felt a chill spread across my arms. My hands trembled as I reached for the doorknob. I stepped into the garage and clicked on the overhead light. The armchair was sideways, closer to the door than before. I could see fresh scrape marks on the floor. I felt a surge of panic. My mind raced. I had no explanation for this. Nobody else was in my house, and the windows in the garage were sealed and locked. I could smell that rotten stench again. It made my stomach churn, and I had to swallow hard to keep from gagging. I forced myself to approach the armchair. I tried pushing it back to the center of the garage, but I felt uneasy touching it. My hands shook on the armrests, and I held my breath to avoid that horrible smell. I walked back inside, locked the door, and put a chair against the handle. I turned on every light in the house. I paced around the living room, trying to calm down, but my thoughts wouldn't settle. Eventually, I sat on my couch, hugging a throw pillow, just staring at the hallway. I couldn't focus on anything else. My body felt wired, like I'd had too much caffeine. My legs kept bouncing and my breath felt shallow. I stayed like that for hours, unable to sleep. When morning came, I called my buddy again. He was still out of town. I checked the junk removal service and they said they could come in 3 days. I told them to put me on the schedule. I spent the rest of the day at a cafe. I didn't want to be in the house. I tried to read the news on my phone, but I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept going back to that armchair and the way it had turned toward the door. When I finally returned home in the late afternoon, I walked straight to the garage. It was in the same spot as the night before. I opened all the windows in the house to clear out any trace of that smell. It helped a bit. That night I sat up in bed, reading with a bright lamp on. I heard 3 distinct thuds coming from the garage. It sounded like the armchair was banging against the wall. My heart sank. I got up, grabbed a baseball bat from my closet, and crept to the garage door. I pressed my ear against it. I heard another thump. It was faint, but it was there. My arm hair stood on end, and I felt sweat rolling down my back. I flung the door open, and I shined a flashlight into the garage. The overhead light was still on, and the armchair looked closer to the door again, angled toward me. Fresh scrape marks were on the floor, and a small pile of dust had collected near one of its legs. I don't know why I did it, but I felt a sudden burst of anger. I took the baseball bat and swung it at the armchair's leg. The sound of wood cracking against wood echoed in the garage. I hit it again, knocking a chunk of the chair's leg loose. My heart pounded, and my breath came in gasps. I felt a sting in my hands from the vibration of the bat. I stared at the chair, waiting for something to happen. For a moment I thought I heard a soft groan, but it might have been my own breathing. I left the garage, locked the door, and went back inside. I didn't sleep much. The next morning I checked the chair again. It was still in the same place, with the chipped leg lying on the floor next to it. The smell was weaker, almost gone. That entire day I kept checking the chair, expecting it to move again. It never did. I waited for the junk removal guys, but I didn't hear a single noise from the garage. The smell never returned. I still felt on edge, but I was relieved that at least it wasn't moving anymore. 2 days later, the junk service showed up. They backed a truck into my driveway, and 2 men carried the armchair away. I watched them load it into the back of the truck. One of them complained about the weight, and the other said it smelled weird. I just nodded, paid them, and locked my door as soon as they left. That night my house felt quiet again. I slept better than I had in weeks. I woke up in the morning without that sense of dread. No strange smells, no weird noises, and no furniture changing positions. I kept checking the corners of my house just in case, but nothing felt off. It's been a few days since then, and I think it's over. I can't explain any of this. I don't know if the armchair was haunted or if there's some bizarre logical explanation. All I know is that it's gone now, and my house finally feels normal. I still get jumpy when I walk into the living room at night. Sometimes I flick on the light and half expect to see that armchair staring back at me. But it's not there. It's gone. I'm telling this story because it rattled me in ways I never expected. I feel uneasy even sharing it, but I need to. I don't feel fully settled, but at least I can breathe again. And if I ever see another old armchair in a store, I'm not going to buy it. I've learned my lesson. No more antiques. I just want peace. I want a quiet, uneventful life. If you ever see a piece of furniture that feels off, trust your instincts. That's all I can say. It's not worth the sleepless nights and the gnawing sense that something is in your house, watching you when you're alone. Now, I'm just glad it's over. I found the diary on my doorstep on a rainy Tuesday morning. It was the first thing I saw when I opened my front door. It had a worn brown cover and no name on the front. The edges were frayed, and the pages inside looked old, but nothing about it seemed unusual at first glance. I picked it up because I assumed someone had dropped it there. I didn't think twice about it until I noticed my name was on the first page inside. Written in neat black pen, "This belongs to Mark Weller." That's my name. The handwriting wasn't mine. I took the diary inside. I sat down at my kitchen table. The rain was still coming down outside, so I could hear the drops tapping on the windows. My kitchen had that musty smell it gets when I leave the windows closed for too long. I poured myself a cup of coffee and flipped through the pages. A chill prickled the back of my neck when I saw the dates. The first entry was from yesterday. It described my entire day. It mentioned that I woke up at 7:45 a.m., that I stubbed my toe on the coffee table, and that I had cereal for breakfast even though I usually prefer toast. It even talked about how I spilled coffee on my shirt, and how I changed it right before leaving for work. All those things actually happened yesterday. The entry went into surprising detail, listing times and small details I had forgotten. It noted the color of my shirt, a dull green polo, the specific coffee I brewed, and it even mentioned the traffic I hit on my way to the office. My heart pounded. I thought maybe it was some bizarre prank. Maybe a friend of mine had followed me around. But nobody would go through that kind of effort. Also, the handwriting wasn't anyone's I recognized. I flipped to the next entry. That one was dated today. It said I would wake up at 7:50 a.m., but lie in bed for 5 more minutes and eventually get up at 7:55 a.m. That was exactly what had happened. The diary also described that I would find it on my doorstep and bring it inside. It even said I'd make coffee and read about my day. That made my hands sweat. It said after that I'd see a stranger knock on my door, someone I'd never met, who'd be looking for directions to a local bookstore. Then it described how I'd send him 2 blocks down, then left at a stop sign. It said I would feel confused and uneasy. I set the diary down. My throat felt dry. I stood up, walked to my sink, and drank a glass of water. I stared at the diary for a few minutes, unsure if I should open it again. My mind was racing. I didn't believe in anything supernatural, so I assumed there was some sort of trick behind it. I walked over to the door to check outside. There was nobody there, only the wet front step and some scattered leaves. I felt a small wave of relief. I figured maybe the diary entry about the stranger was just random nonsense. 10 minutes later, I heard a knock on the door. I froze. My stomach fluttered, and I felt my heartbeat in my ears. I walked quietly to the door and peered through the peephole. I saw a guy in a black jacket with a ball cap standing on my porch. He looked normal, maybe in his late 20s. He seemed anxious, or maybe just cold from the rain. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The man apologized for bothering me and asked if I knew how to get to a bookstore named Flynn's Books. I gave him directions. I told him to go 2 blocks down, then take a left at the stop sign. He thanked me, smiled, and walked away. I stood there in silence, feeling the hair on my arm stand up. I closed the door and locked it. I walked back to the kitchen. I picked up the diary, and my hands shook. I read the next line. It said I would close my door, lock it, and read the diary again in my kitchen. My vision blurred for a second, and I had to sit down because my legs felt weak. I glanced at the clock on my wall. It was 8:25 a.m. The diary had also mentioned that time. Everything was matching up, word for word. I flipped ahead to tomorrow's date. The diary had a paragraph describing how I'd go to a local diner for lunch instead of my usual sandwich at the office. It said I'd see a woman sitting alone at a booth by the window and that she'd wave me over. She'd introduce herself as Rachel, and she'd talk to me about a project she was working on. The diary said she'd mention my name before I even introduced myself. I felt the pit in my stomach tighten. I had no idea who Rachel was. The diary also mentioned that she'd have a small bandage on her left hand and that she'd be wearing a gray hoodie. I slammed the diary shut. My heart was pounding. I decided I couldn't stay home. I had to go to the office and pretend everything was normal. I drove through the drizzle and parked in my usual spot. My thoughts were spinning the entire time. I walked into the building and set the diary in my desk drawer. For the rest of the morning, I tried to focus on my tasks, but I kept glancing at my drawer. At one point, I stood up, walked to the bathroom, and splashed water on my face. I felt lightheaded. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked tired and my hair was a mess. I wondered if the diary had any new surprises for me if I flipped through more pages. Lunchtime arrived, and I remembered the entry. According to it, I'd go to a local diner. I usually bring my lunch, but I had left it at home in my fridge because I was so distracted by the diary incident. I had no food, so it made sense to go out to eat. I hesitated. My palms were damp. I could feel sweat on my neck. I grabbed my jacket and walked out. I told myself I'd pick a different place. I headed to a fast food joint, but I remembered I had a coupon for that diner. I felt pulled to the place, like it was the path of least resistance. My breathing was shallow. I got in my car and drove there. I pushed open the door to the diner. The smell of frying bacon and coffee hit me immediately. The place wasn't crowded. I spotted the woman right away because she was sitting alone near the window. She had a gray hoodie on. There was a small white bandage wrapped around her left hand. I felt a wave of unease. She looked up, met my eyes, and waved me over. I considered ignoring her, but curiosity got the better of me. I approached her booth and she said, "Mark, right?" My knees felt weak. I nodded and swallowed. She told me her name was Rachel. She said she had been waiting to talk to me about something she couldn't explain. She looked nervous, and her cheeks had a slight flush. I noticed she clutched a pen with her bandaged hand. Her voice trembled a bit. I couldn't think of anything to say. I just asked her how she knew my name. She said she found a note telling her to be at the diner at this exact time and date, to look for me, and to talk about the diary. I felt dizzy. I sat down. I rubbed my temples with my fingers. The diary had predicted all of this. Rachel asked me if I was experiencing strange events, like seeing details about my life written in a small notebook. I admitted I had a diary and it was predicting my day with eerie accuracy. I told her about the stranger at my door, the directions, the exact times. She listened carefully, then pulled out a folded piece of paper from her hoodie pocket. On it were instructions. They described what she should say to me. They also told her I'd mention a diary with entries about future events. Her piece of paper was typed, not handwritten. She had no idea who typed it. She found it slipped under her door last night. She only noticed it when she stepped out in the morning. The instructions had her name on them, and they mentioned me by name. The page told her I would be wearing a blue button-down shirt and dark jeans, which was true. I felt short of breath. We compared notes. She asked me if I had more information. I said I'd show her the diary if she wanted proof, but it was back at my office. She said she had the afternoon free. She suggested we go check it out. I wanted to say no, but I also wanted answers. We finished our lunch in silence. I had a club sandwich that tasted bland. My appetite was gone. I forced myself to chew and swallow. I sipped my water and noticed my hands were shaking a little. We walked out together. Outside, the drizzle had stopped, but the streets were still wet. Cars splashed small puddles as they passed. I led her to my car. She got in, and we drove the 10 minutes back to my office building. During the ride, we didn't talk much. She kept fiddling with the bandage on her hand. I kept my eyes on the road and glanced at her occasionally. She was breathing slowly, and her foot tapped the floor. We were both on edge. At my desk, I pulled out the diary. Rachel leaned in close, looking at the handwritten entries. She asked if I recognized the writing. I told her I didn't. I flipped to tomorrow's date again. Now there was another section describing how I'd bring a woman named Rachel to my office and show her the diary. That entire situation was already spelled out in neat paragraphs. The diary claimed that she and I would form some sort of plan to track down who wrote these notes. Then it mentioned we would see a bearded man wearing a red plaid shirt standing in the lobby, staring at us as we walked out. This man would say something cryptic about time running out, then leave. That made me rub the back of my neck, trying to ease the tension. Rachel looked at the entry and shut the diary. She glanced around my small, cluttered workspace. She asked if I had any leads on who might have left it. I had no clue. I didn't recall anyone suspicious in the last few days. I suggested we might call the police, but then I realized how insane this would sound. We decided to see if the next part of the diary's prediction would happen. We walked to the lobby, and we stood near the receptionist's desk. We stayed there for 5 or 6 minutes, waiting. I felt my stomach twist. Rachel stood with her arms crossed, tapping her foot on the tile. A man wearing a red plaid shirt entered through the front doors. He had a thick beard and a baseball cap. He paused in the doorway, looked directly at us, and frowned. He murmured, "Time's running out." Then he walked back outside. My chest felt tight. Rachel's eyes went wide. She looked at me and shook her head like she didn't know what to say. I felt sweat trickle down my temples. My heart was thumping so loudly in my ears that I barely heard the phones ringing on the receptionist's desk. We stepped outside, hoping to catch the man, but he was gone. We walked around the block, looking for a guy in a red plaid shirt. We didn't see him. We didn't see any sign of him at all. The air felt chilly, and the clouds overhead looked darker. The damp smell of the sidewalk and the lingering drizzle clung to the atmosphere. We gave up after a few minutes and went back to my office. Rachel and I decided to meet again after work. She wanted me to read more of the diary to see if there were more details about tomorrow. We agreed to meet at my house around 7 p.m. She left me her number and I gave her mine. My afternoon dragged on. I was too distracted to focus on my tasks. I kept thinking about the man in plaid, the diary's notes, and Rachel's typed instructions. At 5 p.m., I rushed out. I drove home, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds. I didn't see anyone following me. I made it to my house, unlocked the door, and tossed my bag on the couch. My living room felt quiet and tense. I changed into a t-shirt and jeans, then sat at the kitchen table with the diary in front of me again. My leg bounced under the table while I read the next few entries. They mentioned me and Rachel trying to find some old building in town, an abandoned warehouse near an industrial park. They talked about meeting a man who had the answers, but the lines were smudged, as if the ink had run. I couldn't make out everything. The pages felt strangely brittle, and I had to turn them gently. At 7 p.m., Rachel knocked on my door. She had changed into a dark jacket, and she still wore that bandage on her left hand. She sat down in my living room, and I showed her the new entries. She asked if I had ever visited that old industrial park. I shook my head. I said I wasn't sure what this was all about. She asked if I planned to follow these instructions. The idea of going to a deserted warehouse unsettled me. My palms felt clammy just thinking about it, but I also wanted to see if it would answer any questions. We agreed we'd drive there tomorrow. We were both curious. We figured we had no better lead. After that, I made a quick dinner. Rachel and I didn't talk much. We just ate sandwiches with bottled water. Neither of us had much appetite. She tapped her fingers on the table, and I paced around the living room. Eventually, she left. I locked my door and flipped through the diary again. The final entries I could see talked about more random strangers, more warnings, and more detailed predictions. They mentioned times, dates, and places I had never been. I felt my skin crawl as I read them. I set the diary down. My head hurt. I turned on my TV to drown out the silence. I heard the nightly news anchor's voice. I tried to focus on that instead of the knot in my stomach. The diary sat on the table like a silent question. My heart still felt restless. My mind kept replaying the stranger in the plaid shirt, his cold stare, and those words, "Time's running out." I shook my head. I couldn't relax. I went to bed around 11 p.m. I kept the diary on my nightstand, face down. I fell asleep with the lamp on. My body was tired, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. Whenever I closed my eyes, I imagined new lines appearing in that diary, describing every breath I took. A few hours later, I finally drifted off. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. All I know is that the diary hasn't been wrong yet. I feel stuck between wanting to ignore it and wanting to find out how it knows my future. And I have no clue who left it on my doorstep. But I can't deny it's real. I can't pretend it's just a coincidence. My day has matched every entry, down to the smallest details. Even now, my mouth is dry, my hands are stiff, and I feel like something big is about to happen. I can't turn back. I need answers, and I plan to go wherever these pages lead me. I woke up 3 nights ago with my heart pounding and my sheets soaked in sweat. That was the first time I realized something strange was happening in my neighborhood. People said it was nothing more than ordinary fog, the kind you get during cold nights. But I saw different shapes in it. And that first night I felt something electric on my skin when I stepped outside and let the mist brush against my arms. It wasn't natural. It made my hair stand on end. It made me feel like I was about to be swallowed by something that didn't belong here. On that first night, I stood on my porch and tried to focus on anything I could see beyond the street lamp. The light spread across the sidewalk, but then everything faded into a gray wall of mist. My neighbor's house was only a few feet away, but I could barely make out the outline of his fence. The air felt heavy in my lungs. My chest got tight and my arms tingled. I heard a quiet sound like something sliding over the pavement. I took a few steps down from the porch, holding my breath, listening for more. The sound vanished. I looked around, but I couldn't see anything or anyone. My hands were trembling. My breath felt shallow. Eventually, I went back inside and locked the door. My heart raced for a long time before I fell asleep. The next day, I felt tense. My shoulders were stiff, and I kept replaying the scene in my head. My neighbor Mark told me he'd barely noticed the fog the night before. He shrugged and said the weather had been weird lately, but that was it. I asked him if he heard anything or saw anything odd. He gave me a confused look and said he'd been watching a baseball game all evening. He didn't seem interested, so I dropped it. All day, I felt a nagging sense of unease. When evening came, I almost didn't want to step outside, but I couldn't ignore it. I had to see if the fog would return. It rolled in around 9 o'clock. I sat in my living room watching TV, but I felt a strange energy in the air. I peeked out the window and saw the street disappearing behind a thick blanket of white. My chest got tight again. I put on a jacket and stepped outside. The cold mist touched my face. It wasn't just moisture, it felt like tiny needles prickling my skin. My ears started ringing, so I pressed my palms over them. I kept walking. The streetlight near my house was on, but it didn't do much. The beam just stopped a few feet out, swallowed by the whiteness. I thought I saw a shadow move near the lamppost. It was a quick blur, almost like a head turning toward me. My legs tensed up. I reached out, hoping to feel something solid, but I only touched the cold air. I'm not sure how long I stood there. A slight breeze moved the fog around. The shadow I thought I saw disappeared, then reappeared a few feet to the side. I tried to walk toward it. My heart banged against my ribs, my eyes began to water. When I reached the spot, there was no one. I lifted my head and tried to breathe slowly. My mouth felt dry. I could taste something bitter at the back of my throat. I stepped back, turned toward my house, and moved inside quickly. Once the door shut, the air around me felt warm, but I couldn't stop shaking. I locked the door, checked the windows, and turned on all the lights. I felt a current of fear running up my spine. I sat in the living room with the TV on, but I didn't really watch anything. I just listened for any noise outside. I heard the wind and the occasional drip of condensation from the gutters. Around midnight, I fell asleep on the couch. That night, I had my first nightmare. I dreamt that the fog crept under the doors and seeped through the windows. My house was filled with it, room after room. I couldn't see my furniture, my walls, or the floor. I felt pressure in my chest. I tried running for the front door, but the fog felt thick, like it was pushing me back. I woke up gasping for air. My throat burned. My shirt was stuck to my skin with sweat. I grabbed a glass of water and tried to calm down, but my mind kept flashing back to that thick, pale mist, swallowing every corner of my house. The next morning, I told Mark about it again. I told him everything. He nodded politely, but I could tell he was just humoring me. Another neighbor, Lisa, walked by. I asked her if she'd seen anything strange. She said she'd noticed the fog at night, but hadn't seen any shapes. She told me she usually went to bed early. She shrugged, gave me a sympathetic look, and said maybe I was just having a bad reaction to the change in weather. I felt a little embarrassed, so I left it at that. But something inside me couldn't shake the idea that I was seeing something real, something that no one else was picking up on. I spent the day pacing around my house. I couldn't focus on work. I tried to read, but after a few minutes, I'd catch myself staring at the window. By evening, I decided I'd try to document whatever I saw. I grabbed my phone and waited by the window. When the fog came in, I stepped outside and started recording. At first, the video just showed the grayness. My hand was shaking, so the image looked unsteady. I tried holding my phone still, pointing it at the street lamp. After a few seconds, I thought I caught a flicker at the edge of the frame. I zoomed in, trying to see. The screen showed an empty street covered in white haze, but to the left I saw a faint movement. I couldn't tell if it was a human figure or just a swirl of mist. I whispered into the phone what I was doing. My voice sounded shaky. I stepped closer to the street, hoping to catch a clearer image. My footsteps felt heavy. My mouth was dry again. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. When I reached the sidewalk, the fog wrapped around me. My jacket felt damp. My hair felt clammy. I heard my own breathing, slow and uneven. I kept holding my phone out in front of me, trying to focus. Then, behind a thin patch of fog, I caught a glimpse of what looked like a face. It wasn't solid. It shifted in and out like it was trying to form. My chest constricted, my arms got goosebumps. I stepped forward slowly, phone pointed at the shape, but as I moved closer, the shape faded. My phone screen showed nothing but white. I cursed under my breath. I took a few more steps, but there was nothing. I walked back to my porch. I stopped recording. My hands were shaking badly. I opened my phone's gallery to watch the video. It showed some vague shapes, but it wasn't clear. At certain moments, I thought I saw a flicker that could have been a face, but it disappeared too quickly. No one else would believe it unless they already trusted me. I went inside, slammed the door, and tossed my phone onto the couch. I felt restless. My chest felt tight. My head ached. I kept thinking that whatever was out there was aware of me, even if I couldn't prove it. That night, I had another dream about the fog. It was the same feeling as before, the same suffocating presence inside my home. Except this time I didn't just run. I tried touching it. My dream self reached out and my fingertips felt cold, like I'd dunked them in ice water. I woke up shivering, even though my bedroom was warm. My sheets were on the floor. My pillow was damp with sweat. I turned on the light and checked every corner of my house. Nothing was out of place, but I couldn't relax. It was 3 a.m. I paced around for a while, then sat in my living room, scanning the windows for any sign of the fog. I fell asleep around dawn, sprawled out on the couch. When I woke up late the next morning, I felt drained. I drank a cup of coffee and decided to head out for a quick walk around the block. The sun was out and there was no trace of the fog. The neighborhood looked normal. People were mowing their lawns and walking their dogs. I tried to clear my head, but I kept imagining that face in the fog. My stomach tensed every time I thought about how it seemed to be watching me. Throughout the day, I kept checking the weather reports. Some meteorologists mentioned unusual humidity in the area, but nothing that explained the thickness of the fog at night. I tried talking to a few more neighbors. Most hadn't noticed anything strange. A couple said they'd seen the fog but didn't think it was a big deal. I realized I was on my own. That night I felt a surge of determination. I grabbed a flashlight and a thick jacket. I walked outside around 9. The fog was already rolling in, thicker than the night before. My flashlight beam cut through it, but not much. I started walking down the street, away from the street lamp where it was darker. My nerves were raw. My fingers felt numb. The air had a faint salty taste, which was odd for our area. My ears caught a soft rustling sound like fabric moving, but I couldn't see anyone. I kept walking, forcing myself to be calm. My brain kept telling me to go back inside, but I needed to see if I could get closer to whatever I'd been sensing. After a few minutes, I thought I saw a darker patch of fog drifting near a parked car. I aimed my flashlight there. The light showed only mist swirling around. I stepped closer. My arms shook. My breath came in short bursts. My flashlight flickered. I hit it with my hand a couple of times and the beam came back. Then I heard a faint whisper, almost like a human voice. I froze. My legs trembled so badly that I nearly dropped the flashlight. I tried to steady myself, but I kept feeling that tingling sensation run up my spine. The whisper happened again, quieter. It didn't form any words I recognized. It was just a soft sigh, like someone trying to speak but not managing a full sentence. I inched toward the parked car. My foot struck the curb and I stumbled. I caught myself against the side of the car, breathing hard. I shone the flashlight around. The fog swallowed everything a few feet away. My skin felt clammy. My neck felt stiff. Then I noticed a shape near the rear bumper. It was almost like a slender figure made of the same white haze. It shifted. I saw what looked like shoulders and a head. My pulse hammered. I could feel the blood pounding in my temples. I stepped forward and reached out my hand. My flashlight beam trembled across the shape. It backed away just a foot or two, but enough for me to see that it moved with intent. I reached out further, and my fingers brushed the air where it had been. The cold stung my knuckles. The figure disappeared into the fog, leaving a swirl behind. I stood there panting for a long moment. My chest was tight. My legs felt weak. I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. My mouth tasted bitter. After a few seconds, I turned and headed home as fast as I could without breaking into a full run. When I got inside, I locked the door, put down my flashlight, and tried to steady my breathing. My hands were cold and damp. I dried them on my pants, but they kept shaking. I spent the next hour sitting in my armchair, staring at the turned-off TV screen. I kept thinking about that figure at the car. It definitely had a form. It reacted to me. It wasn't my imagination. By now, I couldn't sleep well at all. Every time I tried, I saw images of the fog creeping into my house. In my dreams, the windows wouldn't shut and the doors wouldn't lock. That thick white mist filled every room, making it impossible to breathe. I woke up gulping for air, holding my chest. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I wanted to stay awake to avoid that suffocating feeling, but exhaustion finally knocked me out each night. And each night, the dreams returned. I started avoiding going out after dark, even though that didn't stop the nightmares. I kept the blinds closed. I kept the TV on to drown out any noises. I tried calling a friend in another town to tell him what was happening, but he probably thought I was losing my mind. He told me to see a doctor, said maybe I was under stress. I hung up without arguing. Words wouldn't convince him. I considered filming another video, but I was too nervous to go out into the fog by myself. I stayed inside, pacing, listening to every creak and gust of wind. Tonight, the fog came in even earlier. I smelled it before I saw it. My living room window started to cloud up around 8 o'clock. I spotted the hazy glow of the street lamp. At first, I tried to ignore it, but then I noticed movement outside my front yard. I felt an icy wave of panic. I stood up and moved toward the window, but I stopped myself. My legs felt heavy. My scalp tingled. I kept thinking about the shape I'd seen. Finally, I forced myself to pull the curtain aside just a bit. Through the glass, I saw swirling whiteness. The porch light lit up a small patch, but beyond that, everything was gray. I stared for what felt like an hour, although it was probably only a few minutes. I couldn't make out any figures. The street looked empty, but I felt my heart racing. I was convinced something was watching me. My chest felt hollow and tight at the same time. A dull ache spread between my shoulders. I let the curtain drop. I can't sleep now. My body is tired, but my mind won't shut down. Every time I close my eyes, I picture a face forming in that dense mist pressing against my windows. I keep telling myself it's just fog, but I know there's something else. I've seen it shift and move. I've heard the whispers. I've watched it recoil when I reached out my hand. Nothing about it feels normal. It doesn't vanish with the sunrise in my head. It stays there, in my thoughts, hiding behind every memory of these last few nights. I don't know what will happen tomorrow. I'm hoping the fog goes away soon, but if it doesn't, I'll keep my doors locked. I'll keep my flashlight next to me. I don't have any other plan. I just want it to leave. My body can't handle much more of this. My mind keeps replaying the sight of that shifting shape outside the car, and I wonder if it or something like it is drifting through the street right now. I try not to think about it, but my eyes keep flickering to the window. I'm telling you all of this because I need to let someone know what's going on. I need you to understand that I'm not imagining things. Every night the fog returns, and I see it shift and twist, forming brief shapes that vanish when I get close. I can't stop trembling when I see it. My pulse thunders in my ears, my mouth goes dry. This is real. I don't know if it's a spirit or some odd phenomenon, but it's out there, and it's getting bolder. I can't prove it to anyone. I just feel it every night, crawling around my neighborhood, wrapping around everything, settling on my porch and pressing against my windows. I hope it leaves soon. I hope I can get a full night of sleep without fighting for air in my dreams. But for now, I'm just waiting and watching, wondering how much more I can take. I'm going to be honest right from the start. I don't have a clue what the thing in the subway window wants from me. I'm not crazy. I'm not under stress that I can't handle. I just see this reflection acting on its own. It started 2 weeks ago. I still remember the moment I noticed it for the first time. It was around 5 in the afternoon. I was on my usual train, the same one I take every weekday. I was leaning against the door, looking at the window. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't moving. But my reflection blinked on its own, and then it gave me a small wink. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the window. My heart was beating faster than normal. I remember my hands tightening around the pole next to me. Nobody else seemed to notice anything weird. A guy in a gray jacket was scrolling on his phone. A woman was reading something on a tablet. A group of teenagers was leaning against the seats, chatting. Everything around me was ordinary. But I saw that reflection wink, and I knew I didn't blink with it. The doors opened at my stop. I got off and tried to forget it. I thought maybe I was tired, or my eyes were playing tricks on me. I went home, warmed up some leftovers, and watched TV. I could still feel that strange sensation, though. It was like a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I didn't sleep well that night. The next day, I followed my routine. I left my apartment at the same time. I walked to the station, took the usual escalator down, and got on the same train car. I stood at the door like I always do. Part of me wanted to avoid looking at my reflection, but my eyes drifted toward it. At first, everything looked normal. I saw my tired face, my messy hair, my shirt. Then my reflection moved its lips as if it wanted to say something. I didn't move my mouth at all. I took a step back. My pulse pounded in my ears. The next thing I noticed was that my reflection moved its lips again, but I didn't hear a voice. It was just an empty, silent motion. I tried to look away. I focused on the map above the seats, the bright overhead lights, the red advertisement for some fitness program. But my reflection stayed in the corner of my eye. It was leaning forward, close to the glass on its side, like it was staring at me with interest. When the train stopped, I rushed off as soon as the doors opened. I had sweaty hands and my legs felt shaky. I couldn't focus on work that day. My boss asked me if I felt sick. I told him I was fine. I drank some water, took a few deep breaths, and tried to move on. But all day, I felt uneasy. It was like something was watching me even when I was sitting at my desk. That evening, I had to take the train home. I almost considered a cab, but I didn't want to waste money. I told myself it was just my imagination. I got on the train, sat in a seat this time, and avoided the windows. The ride felt longer than usual, but I made it home without seeing anything strange. I let out a sigh of relief when the doors opened at my stop. I went home, ate some quick dinner, and turned in early. But the next day, I couldn't avoid the window. The car was packed. I stood against the door by necessity. The crowd was squeezed in, and I ended up right in front of the glass. I tried to keep my gaze straight ahead, but I couldn't help glancing at it. My reflection was there, doing the same stance as me. But it had this slight grin. My face was blank. My lips were pressed together because I was holding back a wave of fear. The reflection's mouth was curled up in a small, twisted smile. I clenched my jaw and stared at that reflection. It just kept smiling at me. I was breathing faster than normal. My chest felt tight. My forehead was damp with sweat. I tried to calm myself, but it was hard to ignore that face staring back. We pulled into my stop. Before the doors opened, I saw the reflection raise a hand like it was waving goodbye. I didn't raise my hand at all. Once I was on the platform, I looked around to see if anybody else seemed disturbed. Nobody cared. People were rushing to get to work or they were checking their phones. I felt alone and confused. I rode the escalator up, feeling like my mind was stuck on that grin. Over the next few days, I tried everything to avoid looking at the subway windows. I sometimes kept my eyes shut. Sometimes I stared at the floor. I changed cars a few times, hoping that maybe a different position would help. But my reflection always found a way to bother me. Sometimes I caught it from the corner of my eye, leaning its head to the side like it was curious. Other times, It mouthed silent words, still with no sound. One day, it knocked on the glass from the other side. I heard a faint tapping noise, but I couldn't be sure if it was real or in my head. All I know is that its knuckles seemed to strike the glass, and I felt my ears warm up with panic. I developed a constant tension in my shoulders. I'd lie in bed at night, rolling my shoulders, trying to relax, but I couldn't. I couldn't stop thinking about that reflection. It felt like a person. It felt like a separate being that was stuck in the glass. Whenever I walked past mirrors or shop windows, I avoided them. I didn't want to see if it followed me outside of the train. Part of me worried that it might. I still went to work because I have bills to pay. I have a boss who expects me to show up. I can't tell him I'm seeing my reflection move on its own. He'd send me to a company therapist or something. I kept quiet. I tried to maintain my regular schedule, but every train ride turned into a nightmare. Some days I felt the reflection was calmer, just standing there, blinking at me. Other days it would shift its mouth or tap the window or run a hand through its hair in a way I wasn't doing. One morning, I accidentally locked eyes with it. I was reading an email on my phone. I looked up and my reflection was staring directly at me. It smiled again. Then it pointed at me just for a second, like it was singling me out. It gave a quick nod like it wanted me to notice that we weren't synchronized. My chest got tight. I thought I was going to have a panic attack right there. My breath felt shallow. I held the pole with a trembling hand. I looked away as soon as I could. A woman next to me glanced at me with concern. I just pretended I was feeling a bit sick. She turned back to her phone after a moment. That evening when I got on the train, I spotted my reflection in the window across from me. I saw myself between other passengers, but my reflection was looking directly at me, tilting its head to the left. I had my head straight, so it was obvious we weren't mirroring each other. I felt my stomach twist. I tried to shift positions, placing myself behind a taller guy, but I could still see my reflection peeking around him, leaning sideways, as though it was searching for my face. I saw its eyes look toward me, and I felt my body break out in chills. One day I managed to get a seat. I sat there with my backpack on my lap. I stared at the floor most of the time. But the train has reflective surfaces everywhere, not just the windows. Sometimes the doors have that faint reflection if the light hits them right. Sometimes the polished metal near the seats shows a distorted version of your face. I tried not to look, but I kept catching glimpses of it. The reflection's eyes were always on me. It was creeping me out more each day. My sleep got worse. I kept having nightmares about being stuck inside a glass wall. I'd wake up sweating, my heart pounding. I felt like my apartment was the only place where I could relax a little, but that feeling never lasted. Every morning, I'd have to get back on the train. Every evening, I'd have to come home. There was no escape from those windows. I started thinking about skipping the train altogether. Maybe I could ride a bus instead, or walk part of the way. But my commute would take an extra hour or more if I did that. I don't have a car, so that's not an option. I tried taking a different train line, but eventually I had to switch back to my usual route to get where I needed to go. And there it was again, waiting for me in the window. This past Tuesday, I couldn't keep ignoring it. I was standing near the door. The train was crowded. A few stops in, the passengers shifted, and I ended up with a clear view of my reflection. I looked at it before I could stop myself. It was smiling at me, wide and unnatural. I stared back, feeling my breathing pick up. Then it brought its hand up, pressed the palm against the glass, and gave me a slow, deliberate wave. I could hear my own pulse. My ears felt hot. I tried not to blink. I tried to stay calm. Then it tapped the glass 3 times, slow and steady. I heard a faint clicking sound, like fingernails tapping on a window. I felt a bead of sweat roll down the side of my face. I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry. I glanced around, but nobody seemed to notice anything. I looked back at the reflection. It was still smiling, but it didn't tap again. It just kept its face close to the glass, its eyes locked on mine. When my stop came, I shoved my way through the crowd. I stepped out onto the platform and felt my legs wobble. I walked toward the stairs, trying to regulate my breathing. I felt a strong urge to look back at the train, but I was afraid of what I might see. I just kept walking. When I got to the street level, I had to sit down on a bench for a moment. I wiped the sweat from my forehead. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding so hard it almost hurt. I reached work late. My boss pulled me into his office and asked if everything was okay. I told him I was feeling sick. He said I should see a doctor. I nodded, but I didn't plan on talking to a doctor about this. I don't know how to explain that my own reflection is doing these weird things. I don't want to get labeled as unstable. I just want this to stop. That night, I got home and threw my bag on the couch. I paced around my living room. I poured myself a glass of water and drank it in 3 large gulps. I could feel my muscles tense. I turned off all the lights and just stood there, trying to breathe in and out slowly. It was quiet, but I felt like the windows of my apartment might betray me if I looked. I eventually sat down, flipped on the TV, and tried to distract myself with a dumb show. My mind wasn't paying attention to the plot, though. All I could think about was that reflection. The next morning, I woke up and decided I would try something different. I got on the train, but I forced myself to look at the reflection straight on. I wanted to see if maybe it would mimic me or if it would do something else. At first, it just looked back, copying my posture the way a normal reflection would. My breathing was shallow. My arms felt heavy. I waited, watching for any strange movement. Then, slowly, it closed one eye in a lazy wink. I didn't move my eye at all. It pulled up the corner of its mouth in that familiar smirk. My stomach flipped. I felt that knot in my gut again. I couldn't keep staring. I turned away and grabbed onto the nearest pole. My head felt light, like I might pass out if I didn't focus on something else. The ride felt like it lasted forever, but eventually, the doors opened at my stop. I got off and practically sprinted onto the platform. I was breathing hard. My palms were wet with sweat. I wiped them on my pants and tried to calm down. Now it's been 2 weeks of this. I still see the reflection. It still moves on its own. Sometimes it does small gestures like a nod or a wink. Other times it taps the glass or it smiles in that unsettling way. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why I'm the one seeing it. I've been avoiding the windows, but it doesn't help. If anything, it makes the reflection try harder to get my attention. I can't stand that feeling of being watched. My heart races every time I step onto the train platform. My chest gets tight whenever I see the reflection waiting for me. I keep hoping it will stop, but so far it hasn't. I have no plans to quit my job or move away. That's not an option. I need to get to work. I need to pay rent. I'm stuck taking the train. I'm stuck with that reflection. So every day I brace myself for whatever it's going to do. I try to keep my eyes down, but it's always there in my peripheral vision. When I catch it moving, I feel my pulse hammer in my ears. Sometimes I feel dizzy from the rush of adrenaline. I'm telling you this because I don't know what else to do. I'm not asking for help, I'm just saying it out loud so it's clear that I'm aware of what's happening. I ride the subway every day. I look at the window, and my reflection does things on its own. It smiles, winks, taps on the glass, and tries to get my attention. I don't know why, and I can't make it stop. Maybe I'll keep ignoring it. Maybe it will go away. But for now, I'm just a guy taking the train to work, trying not to look into the glass because my own face isn't following my movements. I see it smile when I'm feeling drained. I see it wave when my hands are in my pockets. I hear it tap when I'm completely still. I don't know how to fight a reflection. I don't even know if it's real. But it feels real to me, and I have to deal with it every single weekday. So that's it. That's what's going on. I'm stuck with this thing on the other side of the glass, acting like it has a mind of its own. I don't know how it ends. I don't know if it ever ends. I just know that tomorrow morning I'll be on that train again, avoiding my reflection, hoping it'll finally stay still. And if it doesn't, I'll have to face it anyway because there's nowhere else to go. I thought I knew every inch of that empty highway. I've driven it countless times, always late at night with my headlights cutting through the dark. There's rarely another car. Sometimes I see a few stray cats or a raccoon in the bushes, but that's about it. So when I noticed a faint glow at the edge of my vision one night, I slowed down. At first I thought it was an abandoned gas station with a broken light, but as I got closer, I realized it was a phone booth. It stood about 50 feet off the road in a small patch of gravel, lit by a trembling bulb inside. I hadn't seen it before. It looked old, the glass panels stained and chipped. I felt drawn to it, even though it didn't make any sense for it to be there. I stopped my car. The engine purred for a few seconds before I turned it off. The night around me was silent except for the low rustle of wind passing through the trees. I remember gripping the steering wheel and hesitating. Something about the booth made me uneasy, but I also felt a strange pull. The light inside was weak, flickering on and off. It lit the glass walls enough for me to see a phone hanging from a cradle. I got out of the car and felt gravel crunch under my feet. The air was cold and smelled like wet leaves. I walked closer, my heart pounding a bit too hard. I was thinking it could be some leftover from a time when this road saw more traffic. Maybe it was a novelty thing. Then I heard the phone ring. That piercing, shrill sound cut right through the stillness. It made me freeze. My spine felt tight and my mouth went dry. I glanced around, wondering if this was a prank. There were no other cars, no houses in sight, no flicker of movement behind the trees. The phone kept ringing. It sounded insistent, like it wouldn't stop until I answered. I stepped forward. The closer I got, the more I noticed how battered the booth was. The glass was scratched. The metal frame had rust spots. The door was half stuck, so I had to tug it hard to open it. The ringing pounded in my ears. My chest felt tight. I picked up the receiver. The line crackled with static, and a distant hum came through. Then I heard a voice. It was metallic, distorted, almost electronic. I couldn't make out the words clearly, but it sounded angry. It was like someone scolding me, but I couldn't understand the exact phrases. My palms started sweating. I tried to speak, but my throat felt paralyzed. I just stood there listening to a garbled rant of some kind. It made me feel small, like I was being cornered in a narrow space. The voice kept crackling and dropping in volume. Sometimes it cut out completely, only to return with more static. It felt wrong. My gut twisted in a way I hadn't experienced before. I slammed the receiver back onto the cradle without thinking. My hand was shaking. For a few seconds I waited, unsure if it would ring again, but the booth stayed silent. The light inside flickered more violently, then steadied to a dull glow. I forced myself to step out of there, feeling a wave of panic in my chest. My mind was racing with questions. Who would call a booth in the middle of nowhere? Why did the voice sound so strange? I stumbled back to my car, my heart hammering. I got in, started the engine, and pulled away fast. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw the booth's dim light. It looked like a single firefly in the distance. After a few turns on that lonely road, it was gone. On the way home, I felt jittery, like I'd had too much caffeine. My hands gripped the steering wheel and my eyes kept darting to the mirrors. There was no one behind me, but I felt watched anyway. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that phone ringing. My muscles tensed up at random moments. I listened for sounds outside my window, but it was quiet. By morning, I convinced myself that I'd run into some bizarre phone line glitch, or maybe some radio interference. Yet the memory of that voice stayed with me. The next day, I had to drive the same road again. I was a little hesitant, but also curious. I wanted to see that booth in the daylight, maybe take a closer look at any signage or labels on it. So, I took the same route at the same spot, but I saw nothing. There was no phone booth. The side of the road had the same gravel patch, but it was empty. The grass there looked undisturbed. There wasn't even a light pole or anything else that would mark the spot. I slowed down, pulled over, and checked for signs that there used to be something there. The ground was flat with a few small rocks scattered around. No footprints, no pieces of glass or metal. It was as if the booth had never existed. That realization sent a chill through me. I walked around for about 10 minutes, kicking stones, searching for any clue. All I found were dried leaves and dirt. My stomach tightened with confusion. I felt an urge to keep looking, but it seemed pointless. There was nothing. Eventually, I got back in my car and drove on. I felt disoriented the whole way, like my brain couldn't reconcile what I'd seen with what I was seeing now. That night, I tossed and turned in bed. Every time I drifted off, I heard a phone ringing. It echoed in my dreams, cutting through whatever random scenes my mind conjured. I'd startle awake, my pulse racing. I would check my phone, but it was never ringing. It happened again and again, until I got up, drank some water, and stared at the ceiling for a while. My head ached from lack of sleep. Over the next few days, I found myself driving back to that spot more than once. Part of me wanted to avoid it, but another part needed answers. Each time I saw the same empty patch of gravel, no signs of a phone booth, no flickering light. On one trip, I got out of my car and walked around the trees. I checked behind them, thinking maybe I got disoriented that night. There was nothing there except branches and old tree trunks. The booth was gone. I felt unsettled, like my memory was playing tricks on me. The phone still rang in my dreams, every single night. It sounded even louder, always the same tone, the same pitch. It would ring 3 or 4 times, then my dream self would pick it up. I never understood the voice in the dreams. It was always blurred and staticky. I'd wake up sweating. My heart would be thudding in my chest. I'd lie there, listening to the silence of my bedroom, wondering if I was losing my grip on reality. One afternoon, I decided to talk to an old coworker of mine who used to live near that area. I asked if he ever recalled a phone booth on that stretch of road. He shook his head and said no. He told me there used to be a small diner near the exit about a mile away, but that closed decades ago. As far as he knew, there was never a public phone booth in that particular spot. I felt foolish bringing it up, so I changed the subject. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled on something that didn't belong. I tried ignoring the phone ring in my dreams. I avoided driving that road whenever possible, taking a longer route to get where I needed to go. But that sound followed me into my sleep every time. My shoulders started to tense up all day long. I felt the muscles in my neck stiffen. I snapped at people for no reason. I was on edge, constantly tired, and my patience was shot. Every night the phone rang in my head. Every morning I woke up feeling drained. After a couple of weeks, I decided to stop avoiding that highway. I wanted to confront the situation head on. Maybe I'd see something I missed. Maybe the booth would show up again. I left my house late in the evening and drove down that same route, scanning the roadside carefully. The night was clear, with no moon. My headlights cut through a darkness that felt thicker than usual. I drove slowly, around 30 miles per hour, checking every inch. I saw the gravel patch, but it was empty. Just a few rocks, some weeds, and the faint outline of a dirt path leading into the trees. I parked and got out. This time I brought a flashlight. I shined it around, letting the beam reveal the ground and the tree trunks. I even checked the bark, looking for signs of vandalism or something that could have explained a power source for a light. There was nothing. A slight wind ruffled my jacket. The leaves on the ground made a light rustling sound. I felt my breath catch, half expecting to hear a ring. But there was only silence. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, rotating in place, waiting for a flicker or a sound. My heart was beating hard enough that I felt a pulse in my temples. The night air felt heavy. Finally, I got back in my car and sat there with the engine off, windows up. I tried to calm myself. No phone booth, no explanation, just that lonely road and my own frayed nerves. On the drive back, the ringing was in my head again. Even though I couldn't hear it with my ears, I sensed it in the back of my mind, like a faint echo that wouldn't go away. By the time I got home, I felt dizzy. I went inside, locked the door, and stood by the window. My hands were trembling. My forehead was damp. I couldn't get rid of that uncomfortable sensation in my chest, like I was about to be scolded again by that distorted voice. Over the next few days, I tried to focus on work and my regular routines. I filled my schedule with errands and phone calls that actually made sense. But every time I dialed a real number, I felt a surge of unease. The dial tone reminded me of that night. The beep of a voicemail reminded me of static. I couldn't escape it no matter how hard I tried. Sleeping became a chore. I'd lie in bed, waiting for the phone to ring in my dream. Sometimes I drifted off for only an hour or two before the nightmare hit me. The phone would ring in the darkness, and when I answered, I heard that metallic voice. I always tried to make out the words, but it felt like listening through thick layers of interference. My heart would race and I'd wake up in a cold sweat. I started leaving a glass of water on my nightstand, along with some painkillers for the headaches I got in the mornings. One night, around 3 weeks after it happened, I dreamed that I was back at the booth. I saw it clearly in my sleep, with the flickering bulb and the scratched glass. I heard the ring and picked up the phone. I listened to the static, waiting for the voice. My dream self tried to speak, but no words came out. Then the booth vanished around me, and I woke up gasping for air. It felt so real that I checked my hands to see if they were dirty from rust or glass shards. They were clean, but shaking. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get a full breath. The next morning, I decided to push that memory aside and focus on living my life, even if the phone kept haunting my sleep. I avoided that road for a while. I took the long way around the county. It cost me extra in gas, but it gave me some peace of mind. The phone booth never appeared anywhere else. The calls in my dreams didn't stop, but they became less frequent. Maybe I was learning to ignore them, or maybe I was just getting used to them. It's been a few months now I haven't seen that booth again. I drive that road sometimes during the day and everything looks normal. No strange lights, no ring in the distance. But at night, especially if I pass that gravel patch after the sun goes down, I feel my skin crawl. I grip the wheel tighter. I keep checking my mirrors. I can't help remembering that old glass box, the sound of static, and the way the voice made my entire body tense with fear. I still dream about it. Not every night, but often enough that I know it's not going away. The ring blasts through my sleep, and I wake up feeling unsettled. I can't figure out what the voice said or why it felt like it was directed at me. I tried recording my dreams in a notebook, scribbling down any fragments of words I thought I heard, but it never came together in a coherent sentence. It's always just bits of sound, like kuksh and tik, you. None of it makes sense. I don't have a neat explanation. I don't know why I saw the booth that night or why it disappeared. I can't prove it existed. Sometimes I wonder if I hallucinated the whole thing, but I remember the crunch of the gravel under my feet, the smell of rust, the flicker of the light, and the feeling of cold metal when I grabbed the handle. It felt real, and the ringing sounded real. That's all I've got. I haven't shared it with many people because it makes me sound unhinged, but it happened. I can't sleep right anymore, and I can't forget that metallic voice. Every time I pass that lonely stretch of road, I half expect the booth to be there again, waiting for me to pick up the phone. I keep driving. I keep looking in my rearview mirror. So far, it hasn't returned, but that doesn't mean I'm free of it. I still hear it in my dreams, and I still wake up with my heart pounding like it did that very first night. I got the call about 2 weeks ago. The company told me they had a job for me at a hotel outside the city. They said it was mostly empty and needed a quick inspection for some wiring issues and general security checks at night. That's all I heard before I packed up and drove out. I didn't expect much. I figured it would be quiet. I didn't think I'd be there alone. But that's what happened. The owners said they couldn't stay around while the work got done, so I ended up being the only person on site. On the first day, nothing seemed too strange. The place was old. The corridors looked a little outdated. The walls had some peeling wallpaper, and the carpet felt worn. I walked around, checked the lights, made sure the doors locked, and noted any loose wiring. It was all routine. There were a few guest rooms on the second floor, but I didn't see anyone inside them. Each room looked basically the same. 2 beds, a small dresser, and an old TV on a stand. Everything felt unused, like nobody had bothered to dust or vacuum in a while. At dusk, I walked outside to see where the hotel was situated. The building sat near a cluster of trees on one side and an overgrown parking lot on the other. There was a single road leading in, mostly gravel. It looked like it hadn't been maintained for years. I wondered why this place was still open at all. The sign out front was cracked and half the letters didn't light up. I tried not to overthink it and just did my job. When I came back inside, I decided to set up a small office in the lobby. There was a desk with an old chair that creaked whenever I leaned back. The fluorescent lights above flickered from time to time. I had my laptop there to log my findings. Around midnight, I usually made rounds. I'd check the back exits, the elevator, the staircases, and the long hallways on every floor. Nothing unusual on the first 2 nights, just squeaky doors and musty air. On the 3rd night, though, I noticed a corridor I hadn't seen before. It was on the west side, near some storage closets. The door to that corridor looked like any other. It was wooden and had a plain knob. I only found it because I was trying to see if any of the storage rooms had extra cleaning supplies I might need. The corridor stretched out with mirrors on both walls. At first I stopped, a bit surprised that a hallway with so many mirrors even existed in this place. The hotel was already old and kind of neglected. Why would they bother with large mirrors on both sides of a corridor? I walked down it slowly, shining my flashlight on the floor. The overhead lighting was so weak that I could barely see my own reflection. The mirrors looked cloudy and dusty. Still, I saw enough to notice my shape move along with me. When I reached the end, there was a single locked door. I tried to open it, but the handle wouldn't budge. I didn't have a key, and it didn't match any of the ones on my ring. I felt uneasy, so I turned around. But as I headed back, I had this weird feeling that something was off with the reflections. At one point, I stopped moving to scratch my arm, and I caught a flicker of motion in the mirror across from me. But my reflection was still. I swear I wasn't moving, but I saw something shift inside that glass. It was quick, almost like a twitch. Then it went still. I told myself I was just tired. I moved closer and wiped some of the dust with my sleeve. The mirror was too dirty to give me a clear look. I headed out of that corridor feeling unsettled. I tried to shake it off. I went back to the lobby, wrote my notes, and called it a night after another hour of walking around. The next day, I asked the owner by phone if there was a corridor with mirrors that I should be aware of. He just said, "Yeah, that's been there a while. Not sure what it was originally for. Maybe a decorative thing." He didn't sound interested. He told me to make sure the wiring was fine and to keep an eye out for any major damage. That night, around 1 in the morning, I did another round. I checked the doors, the main hallway, the small lounge area, and then I headed back to the west side. The same corridor waited for me. I felt like I needed to be thorough, so I decided to walk through it again. Right away, I noticed the air felt colder there. The lights overhead buzzed. They were those old, long fluorescent tubes that sometimes make a low hum. The sound got on my nerves. I glanced at the mirrors and tried not to focus on them, but it was hard. They were everywhere. Halfway down, I heard a faint creak behind me. I turned around, but there was only my reflection. I waited, holding my breath, but I didn't see or hear anything else. I kept going until I reached that locked door. Again, I tried the knob. No luck. I heard a soft scraping noise like something moving behind the door. It stopped as soon as I pressed my ear to the wood. I knocked lightly. Silence. I got frustrated. The corridor gave me a bad vibe, and I wanted out. I turned around and began to walk back, but the corridor seemed longer. I know that sounds strange, but I felt like I was walking more steps than before. My flashlight beam showed me that the lobby door was still ahead, but every time I reached what looked like the exit, it felt like it got farther away. The mirrors reflected an identical corridor on both sides. I could see myself from different angles. Sometimes the reflections lined up with me, and sometimes they didn't. I started panicking. My chest tightened and I could feel sweat forming on my forehead. I tried to calm down by counting my steps and keeping my eyes on the actual path. Then I noticed that some of the mirrors didn't show the same wallpaper. A few reflections showed walls with deep cracks, like the entire corridor was old and crumbling. The floors in those reflections looked scuffed and dirty, worse than what was actually under my feet. One mirror even showed a flickering bulb that didn't match the actual light above me. I moved closer to one mirror and looked at the reflection in detail. It showed me an image of a door that wasn't where the real corridor's door stood. This reflection showed a battered wooden frame with chipped paint. The walls around it were stained and split. I didn't see that in the real corridor. I glanced to my left, but the real wall was still intact, with a dull beige color and a minor scratch here and there. But that was it. When I looked back at the mirror, the cracks were still there, as if I was looking into a decaying version of the hotel. My heartbeat was speeding up. I felt my breathing get heavier. My throat went dry. I forced myself to move, hoping to get out of there as soon as possible. Each step felt heavier. At one point, I actually reached out and touched the wall. It was solid and cold with no cracks. I pressed my hand against it just to be sure. But in the mirror, my hand looked like it was resting on a huge crack in the wall. I kept walking, ignoring the urge to look at more mirrors. The corridor felt endless. The overhead lights buzzed louder in my ears. My footsteps echoed. I looked behind me and saw that locked door was still there, far away. Yet somehow it felt closer than the exit. I had to keep my focus on moving forward. A few minutes later, I reached what I thought was the exit. I lunged for the door handle, but when I pulled it open, I saw a continuation of the corridor. Another set of mirrors on both sides. My flashlight flickered. I tapped it, thinking the batteries were dying, but the light steadied again. Now I felt trapped, like I was caught in some kind of loop. I stepped through the doorway and the door slammed shut behind me. The mirrors in this section looked even older, with patches of black where the reflective backing had worn away. The frames around them, if you could call them frames, were chipped and rough. I saw my reflection, but I didn't look right. My face had dark smudges under the eyes, and my hair looked messier than I remembered. My jacket appeared more worn. I rubbed my sleeve, and in reality it felt the same as before, but the mirror showed it with tears near the elbow. I tried to keep my mind clear. I told myself to check each door on my left and right to see if any led out. I found a few doors, but they were all locked. I jiggled each handle. I tried to push, but none of them gave way. I noticed one door had a small plaque that was half broken. It read "Store," with the rest of the word missing. I knocked, but heard nothing. I kept going. Eventually, I stopped to catch my breath. The corridor was silent except for my own panting and the hum of the lights. I turned around, shining my flashlight behind me. The distance looked the same in both directions now. It was as if I was in the middle of two identical ends. The mirrors reflected each other in an endless row. I started to feel lightheaded, so I leaned against the wall. I thought about busting a mirror to see if I could crawl through to the other side. But I didn't have anything heavy on me, and I didn't want to smash a mirror with my bare hands. Still, the idea kept circling in my head. If I stayed here, I'd go insane. My watch told me it was almost 2 a.m. The idea of being stuck in this twisted corridor all night made me sick. I forced myself to move again. I walked for what felt like another 10 minutes. The corridor turned a corner at one point, which didn't make sense because this hotel wasn't large enough for so many hallways. I followed it anyway, shining my flashlight around each bend. More mirrors, more cracked reflections. My stomach was clenched and my hands were trembling. I had to wipe sweat from my forehead. The tension in my chest felt like it was building with each step. Then I saw something in one of the mirrors. It wasn't just a distortion, it was a room. A guest room with a bed and a small nightstand. The walls had holes and large splits, and the carpet was torn in multiple places. The bedspread was shredded. I inched closer. My reflection was there. But behind me in the glass, I saw this ruined room. It looked like it belonged to the same hotel, but in some rotted state. I spun around, but there was no door leading to a room. Just another mirror on the opposite wall. I tapped the mirror with my flashlight. It felt solid. The reflection didn't waver, but the room behind me did. I could see movement behind the bed like a flicker of shadow. My throat tightened. I took a step back, then another. The movement stopped. I kept walking, ignoring the reflection of that room. My legs started to ache. I couldn't tell if I'd been walking for half an hour or longer. The overhead lights never changed their dull glow. The path never branched off again. It just kept going straight, except for that one corner. I tried to remember each step, but my mind was getting jumbled. Finally, I reached another door. This time it was slightly open. A dim light flickered inside. I peeked in, hoping it led to the lobby or someplace I recognized. Instead, it was a small utility room with a single dusty bulb hanging from the ceiling. The floor was concrete. I stepped in, looking around. Shelves lined the walls, filled with cleaning products and old towels. The air smelled stale. My shoulders relaxed a bit. At least this felt like a normal space. I shut the door behind me. I looked for another exit in that room, but there was none. Just shelves and a single vent near the floor. The place was cramped, barely big enough for one person to stand and turn. I sat on a crate for a moment, trying to slow my breathing. My mind raced, but my body felt exhausted. I thought about calling someone, but my phone showed no signal. I had left my radio in the lobby. That was a mistake. I decided to go back out and keep trying. When I opened the door to return to the corridor, I saw something I recognized. It was the end of the hallway I had first come down. It was the original mirror-lined passage. The overhead lights were different there, a bit brighter. I felt a surge of relief. I hurried forward, ignoring the reflections. I kept my eyes straight ahead on the door at the end. This time it didn't move away from me. I reached it, pushed it open, and stepped into the old lounge on the west side. I stood there for a while, my breath shaking. The corridor was behind me, looking the same as when I first discovered it. I glanced back and saw only a short hallway with mirrors on both sides, maybe 30 feet long. The locked door at the far end was visible. I stared at it, then slammed the door between the lounge and that hallway. I locked it with the key from my ring that usually fit the lounge door. After that, I left the west side entirely. I walked straight to the lobby, flipped on every light I could, and sat in the chair behind the front desk. My hands were shaking so much that I had to grip the edges of the desk to steady myself. I checked my watch. It was almost 3 a.m. I stayed there, wide awake, until dawn. I knew I had to finish the job I was sent here for, but I had no interest in going near that corridor again. In the morning, I made calls and told the owners I'd done all the checks I could. They insisted I stay another night, but I refused. I left the keys on the front desk, grabbed my stuff, and got in my car. As I drove away, the hotel looked the same. Just a rundown place with peeling paint and a broken sign. Nobody would guess there was a corridor inside that stretched and twisted, filled with bizarre reflections. I haven't told anyone else about what happened. I still get chills when I think about that corridor and those mirrors. I remember the feeling of walking and walking without ever reaching the exit. Sometimes I dream about it. I see those cracked rooms on the other side of the glass. I see my reflection doing things I'm not doing. I feel the cold air against my skin. Then I wake up in a sweat, blinking at the ceiling in my apartment. That's the reason I won't go back to that place. I don't care what the hotel owners say about the wiring or the security system. I know what I experienced. I know I saw those rooms in the mirrors, and I know that corridor tried to keep me there. It stretched itself out and led me in circles. I felt my sense of time slip away. I felt my body tense up so hard I could barely move. When I finally got out, I felt a wave of relief like nothing else. I'm not usually a jumpy guy. I've done security in all kinds of weird places. Empty warehouses, abandoned office buildings, you name it. But I've never felt the kind of dread I felt in that mirrored corridor. The memory alone is enough to make my mouth go dry. I don't have any explanation for it. I'm not interested in theories or legends. I only care about the fact that I got away. If anyone else ever takes that job, I hope they never open that door on the west side. Let it stay locked. Let it stay hidden. There's something in there that doesn't line up with the normal layout of the hotel. If you walk in, you might not walk out again. I got lucky once, and that's enough for me. I'm done with that place. That's all I can say. The story isn't fancy, and I'm not adding details to scare anyone. I'm just telling you what I saw and felt. That corridor was real, and it warped around me like it wanted me to stay. I saw reflections that had nothing to do with my actions. I saw a decaying version of the hotel in the mirrors. I heard strange noises behind locked doors. It was not normal. I still have my notes about the wiring and the door locks. If the owners want to fix that corridor, they can do it themselves. I won't go back there, not even for triple the pay. I'm home now and I'm trying to move on. But I keep a flashlight under my bed, and I leave a nightlight on in the hallway outside my apartment door. I don't think I'll ever feel the same when I walk past a mirror late at night. Sometimes my reflection seems fine. Other times I swear I see a flicker, like the reflection isn't quite aligned with me. I don't linger in front of mirrors anymore. I glance, then I move on. That's all I need. I'm not taking any chances. If I see something off, I look away and remind myself I'm safe at home. If I ever have to do security work again, I'll ask more questions before I show up on site. That corridor taught me a lesson about curiosity. It's not always worth it to explore every single hallway you find. Some doors are better left closed. And if you see a hallway full of mirrors, my advice is simple. Walk away. Just walk away.